No gentleman remembers grey. Lady Marianne Vale told herself this while the great front door of Valecombe House stood open to the pale Hampshire afternoon, while wheels ground over the gravel sweep outside, while every polished surface in the entrance hall seemed to wait for a more brilliant woman than she had ever been allowed to become. Spring of 1816 had brought primroses to the lawns, new leaves to the elms, and a nervous shine to Lady Prudence Vale's eyes, which meant only one thing. A guest was coming who mattered. Not to Marianne, of course. Important guests rarely mattered to her except in the way storms mattered to old roofs. They passed overhead, made noise, and left someone else to mend the damage. Not that one, Lady Prudence said sharply from the doorway of Marianne's bedchamber an hour earlier, her gaze fixed on the pale blue gown spread across the counterpane. It is too becoming. Marianne's fingers had rested on the sleeve. For one quiet second, she had allowed herself to imagine wearing it. The muslin was not new, but it softened the severe line of her shoulders and lent warmth to her complexion. It had once belonged to a cousin who had married well and forgotten it in a trunk. Marianne had altered it herself by candlelight, stitch by careful stitch, until it almost looked as though it had been meant for her. Almost. Lady Prudence crossed the room and lifted the sleeve between two fingers as if testing poor cloth at a draper's. Cecilia will wear ivory silk. We cannot have you standing beside her in blue. I was not aware I would be standing beside her at all, Marianne said. Her voice was mild. Years of practice had made it so. Do not be tiresome, Marianne. You know very well that a family must present itself properly. Of course. The grey will do. Lady Prudence nodded toward the wardrobe. Plainness is not always a disadvantage. In your case, it may even be useful. There it was. Not cruelty, precisely. Cruelty required heat. Lady Prudence offered something colder and far more efficient. A woman could survive anger. It was harder to survive being arranged like furniture. Marianne took out the dove-grey muslin dress without argument. It was the plainest garment she owned, neither mourning nor fashion, neither flattering nor offensive. Its hem had been turned twice. Its cuffs were clean but nearly worn through. No ribbon brightened it. No lace softened it. It was the colour of mist before anyone noticed morning had come. Better, Lady Prudence said. A gentleman of sense will not be distracted by you. Marianne looked down at the dress in her hands. That must be a comfort to him. Lady Prudence's mouth tightened. Do not try to be clever. It never improves your prospects. Then she was gone, leaving behind a faint scent of lavender water and judgment. Marianne stood alone before the looking-glass. At 28, she had long ago learned that mirrors were not always honest. They showed the outline of a woman but not the uses to which others had put her. The mirror showed brown hair drawn smoothly back, grey eyes too steady for flirtation, a figure neither fragile nor fashionable, and a mouth that had forgotten how easily younger women smiled. It did not show the years she had spent making herself convenient. It did not show the letters she copied for Lady Prudence, the accounts she corrected after the steward went home, the servant she defended in rooms where no one important listened, or the many evenings she had been dressed just finely enough to prove the Vale family still possessed breeding, and just plainly enough to make Cecilia shine. Lady Cecilia Vale required shining. She had been raised for it. She was 19, golden-haired, blue-eyed, and beautifully trained in the art of seeming innocent while drawing blood with a smile. At breakfast that morning, she had pretended surprise when Lady Prudence mentioned the guest. Only Mr. Ardent, aunt? You spoke of him as if royalty were coming. Lady Prudence had glanced at Marianne, then at the footman, then back at Cecilia. Connections matter as much as titles. Sometimes more, when they lead to titles. Cecilia had laughed softly. Then I shall be kind to him. You shall be captivating, Lady Prudence corrected. Marianne shall help. Marianne had been pouring tea. Her hand had not shaken. That was one of her few accomplishments no one praised. She could be diminished without spilling a drop. How shall I help? She asked. Cecilia turned her bright head. By being yourself, dear cousin. The sugar tongs clicked against the bowl. That should require very little preparation. Cecilia smiled. Exactly. Now, in the grey dress, Marianne fastened the last button at her wrist and refused to sigh. Sighing was wasteful when no one meant to hear. From below came the orderly panic of a house pretending not to panic. Footsteps crossed the hall. A maid whispered and was hushed. Somewhere, Lady Prudence's voice cut through the air with precise instructions about flowers, tea, and which silver tray was not to be used because it made the family look provincial. Valecombe House had been built in the reign of Queen Anne and had been declining with dignity ever since. Its red brick front still impressed visitors from the lane. Its drawing room still held portraits of men who had once advised earls and dined with dukes. But the roof over the east wing leaked after hard rain, the stables had one fewer horse than the family admitted, and the long gallery was kept shut because there was not enough coal to warm rooms no one could afford to use. Marianne knew these things because she was the one who saw the bills before Lady Prudence hid them. She knew which tenant had asked for patience after his wife fell ill. She knew which maid sent half her wages to a mother in Portsmouth. She knew which tradesman had begun writing in a less respectful tone. She knew, too, that Cecilia's ivory silk had not been paid for. None of this would be mentioned today. Today, Valecombe House would be candles, Polish, flowers, and Cecilia seated where the afternoon light made an angel of her hair. Marianne would sit near enough to be useful and far enough to be forgotten. She went downstairs as the carriage halted outside. In the entrance hall, Lady Prudence stood like a commander before battle, one hand closed around a folded letter. Marianne saw the dark seal before her aunt tucked it quickly into her reticule. It had been broken and pressed flat, but not before Marianne glimpsed the impression. Not the Vale crest. Not any family seal she knew. Something crowned. Something formal. Marianne, Lady Prudence said. You will not speak unless addressed. I shall try to bear the disappointment. This is not an afternoon for your wit. Then I am relieved I wore grey. Lady Prudence stared at her. For one perilous heartbeat, Marianne wondered if she had gone too far. Then Cecilia swept into the hall in ivory silk, and the danger passed because Cecilia had arrived to be admired. She was a vision. There was no use denying it. Her gown caught the light as though the room had been built for that purpose. A pearl comb gleamed in her hair. Her gloves were new. Her cheeks carried the faint pink of a woman who knew expectation was already leaning in her favor. She looked Marianne over and widened her eyes. Oh, Marianne. That dress. You recognize it? Marianne asked. I recognize the surrender. Cecilia stepped closer and lowered her voice, though not so low that Lady Prudence could not hear. Do not be wounded. It is a sensible choice. No gentleman remembers grey. Marianne felt the old familiar smallness reach for her. It came politely, as all the worst things did. It asked only that she move aside, smile faintly, and pretend the words had not found their mark. She smoothed one cuff, where the thread had begun to thin. Then I shall enjoy the freedom of being unremembered. Cecilia's smile faltered. Before she could answer, the butler opened the front door wider. Cool air entered first, carrying the scent of damp gravel and spring leaves. Then the guest stepped into Valecombe House. He was not what Marianne had expected. She had imagined a young fortune hunter with too much waistcoat, or an aging widower sent by relatives to inspect Cecilia like a mare at Tattersall's. The man before them was neither. He was tall, dark-haired, and spare in movement, dressed with such restraint that only a careful eye would notice the excellence of his coat or the quiet authority of his gloves. He paused just inside the threshold, not uncertainly, but as if the room had presented him with evidence and he meant to read it before speaking. His gaze passed over the hall, the portraits, Lady Prudence's fixed smile, Cecilia's shining silk, and then, without haste, came to rest on Marianne. Not long. Not improperly. Only enough. It was worse than being ignored. For the first time in longer than she cared to remember, Marianne had the unsettling impression that someone had seen where she had been placed and wondered why. Lady Prudence recovered first. Mr. Ardent, Valecombe House is honoured. Mr. Ardent bowed. Lady Prudence. You are gracious to receive me. His voice was calm, educated, and low enough to make everyone else sound slightly too eager. Cecilia dipped into a perfect curtsy. We have heard so much of your connections, Mr. Ardent. That is a dangerous beginning, he said. Connections are usually less interesting than people hope. Cecilia laughed because she knew she was meant to laugh. Lady Prudence gave a thin smile. You must allow us to prove Hampshire society more interesting than rumour. I should be pleased to be proved wrong. His eyes moved once more, briefly, to Marianne. And this lady? The hall changed. Not visibly. A stranger would have seen only introductions proceeding in the usual manner. But Marianne felt Lady Prudence hesitate. She felt Cecilia's attention sharpen. She felt the absurdity of becoming inconvenient merely by having a name. My niece, Lady Marianne Vale, Lady Prudence said at last. She is staying with us. Staying. As if Marianne had arrived last week with a trunk and no claim. As if she had not spent 12 years in that house since her father's death, becoming useful enough to keep and unimportant enough to overlook. Mr. Ardent bowed to her. Lady Marianne. Mr. Ardent. She curtsied. I hope your journey was comfortable. Comfortable enough. That is usually the most one can ask of Hampshire roads. Something changed at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, exactly. The possibility of one. You speak from experience. From accounts. Repairs to carriage wheels are more honest than most travellers. Lady Prudence gave a small cough. Cecilia's lashes lowered. Mr. Ardent looked at Marianne as if a door had opened where he had expected a wall. Then I must be grateful my wheels survived your county's honesty. Marianne should have said nothing more. She knew this. She had been told not to speak unless addressed, and she had now been addressed enough. She lowered her gaze. The grey dress did its work around her, plain and serviceable, a curtain drawn over a window no one wanted opened. Lady Prudence swept an arm toward the drawing room. Tea is waiting. Cecilia moved at once to Mr. Ardent's side, bright as ivory, practised as music. Lady Prudence followed, already speaking of neighbours, weather, and the quiet pleasures of Valecombe. Marianne remained half a step behind. That was where she belonged in the arrangement of the day. Behind silk. Behind ambition. Behind the lie that plainness was peace. As they crossed into the drawing room, she saw Lady Prudence touch the reticule again, checking that the sealed letter was hidden. Mr. Ardent saw it too. Marianne noticed because his gaze did not follow Cecilia's smile. It followed Lady Prudence's hand. Then, just before he entered the room prepared for his admiration, he looked back at Marianne and at the dove-grey dress everyone had expected him to forget. He did not look amused. He did not look pitying. He looked as though he had found the first true thing in the house. The drawing-room of Valecombe House had been prepared to flatter Cecilia. Marianne understood that the moment she entered it. The curtains had been drawn just enough to soften the afternoon light, leaving a warm spill of gold across the blue damask chair where Cecilia was expected to sit. The tea table had been placed so that Mr. Ardent would face her. The ivory roses from the conservatory stood near enough to echo the colour of her gown. Even the fire, though the day was not cold, had been lit to give the room a glow of prosperity the household no longer possessed. Marianne took the chair Lady Prudence's glance assigned to her, half in shadow beside a table stacked with music no one meant to play. It was a familiar position. She could reach the teapot if needed. She could answer if addressed. She could disappear between duties. Cecilia settled into the favoured chair with a rustle of silk and a smile so practised it seemed almost innocent. You must forgive us if we seem quiet after London, Mr. Ardent, she said. Hampshire can feel very small to gentlemen accustomed to greater circles. Small places often show more than large ones, he replied. Cecilia tilted her head. How philosophical. I hope that means you will not find us dull. I rarely blame a room for what is said in it. Lady Prudence gave a careful laugh, though her eyes moved quickly to Marianne, as if warning her not to find the remark amusing. Marianne lowered her gaze to the tea tray. It was safer to be useful. The silver pot had been polished within an inch of its life. Its reflection showed her grey sleeve, Cecilia's white glove, and Mr. Ardent's dark coat in a distorted little world where everything looked bent but true. Marianne, Lady Prudence said, pour, if you please. Of course. Marianne rose. How do you take your tea, Mr. Ardent? He looked up at her. Not past her. At her. Plain, thank you. Cecilia laughed softly. How severe? Not severe, he said. Accurate. Marianne felt the smallest treacherous movement inside her chest, almost amusement, almost warmth. She kept her hand steady and poured his tea without milk or sugar. When she offered the cup, his fingers did not brush hers. He accepted it with exact courtesy, as if even an accidental touch would be a debt he had no right to claim. That should not have mattered. It did. Cecilia took her tea with 2 sugars and a glance designed to be noticed. I confess, I prefer a little sweetness. One must not make a virtue of austerity. No, Mr. Ardent said. Virtue is often claimed by those who have had no choice in the matter. The words were mild. They changed the air. Lady Prudence adjusted the edge of her shawl. You speak as though you know much of necessity, Mr. Ardent. Enough to respect it. His gaze rested for a moment on the worn cuff at Marianne's wrist, then moved away before the observation could humiliate her. That restraint unsettled her more than open pity would have done. Pity always announced itself. This was something quieter and therefore more dangerous. Lady Prudence began again with fresh brightness. Cecilia has been much admired in music. You must hear her play later. Her Italian songs are considered quite charming. Aunt, you exaggerate, Cecilia said, which meant she believed every word. I don't sing to be praised. Then why do you sing? Mr. Ardent asked. Cecilia blinked. No one had asked it that way. For pleasure, naturally. Your own. What an odd question. Is it? Marianne saw the faint tightening of Lady Prudence's mouth. The afternoon was not proceeding according to design. Cecilia recovered with admirable speed. Perhaps you are teasing me, Mr. Ardent. Gentlemen with serious faces often do. I have been accused of many faults. Teasing is not among them. Then we shall improve you before you leave Valecombe. That sounds ambitious. I am told ambition is a virtue in men. Only by men who want women to forgive it. Marianne looked down quickly, but not before Cecilia saw the hint of a smile she failed to hide. The punishment came at once, wrapped in sweetness. Marianne is very fond of clever remarks. We indulge her when there are no strangers to alarm. I am not alarmed, Mr. Ardent said. Nor a stranger to cleverness, I hope. Lady Prudence set down her cup with a sound too delicate to be an accident. Marianne reads more than is useful. It gives a young lady habits of contradiction. Does reading produce contradiction, he asked, or merely reveal when contradiction is deserved? Silence entered the room, not loudly, but with the confidence of a guest more powerful than any of them. Marianne felt her face warm. She disliked being defended when defense made her more visible. She disliked even more the shameful wish that he might continue. Lady Prudence smiled with effort. You are generous. But society does not always reward young ladies for appearing learned. Society rewards many things it later regrets. Cecilia leaned forward. Then you must tell us what society rewards in your circle, Mr. Ardent. We are all curiosity. For the first time, Marianne heard something beneath the name. Not merely Ardent. Something withheld. Lady Prudence's fingers moved to her reticule again, where the letter lay hidden like a live coal. Mr. Ardent noticed. He noticed everything. In my circle, he said, people reward confidence first, beauty second, fortune third, and character only when the first 3 have failed them. Cecilia's smile thinned. How severe you are. I said accurate, not severe. Marianne should not have spoken. The words left her before caution could stop them. Accuracy is often mistaken for severity by those who prefer decoration. Lady Prudence inhaled. Cecilia turned slowly. Mr. Ardent looked at Marianne as if she had crossed the room without moving. A dangerous observation, Lady Marianne. Then I must hope it was not accurate. Do you often hope to be wrong? Only when being right would be inconvenient. This time he did smile. It was brief, controlled, and gone almost before it existed. Yet it made the room feel less arranged. Cecilia saw it. Marianne knew she did because Cecilia's posture changed by less than an inch. It was enough. Marianne is our practical one, Cecilia said. She knows all sorts of household details. Accounts, stores, rents, repairs. I cannot think how she bears it. By bearing it, Marianne said. How admirable, Cecilia replied. And how very tiring. Mr. Ardent turned his cup once in its saucer. Estate accounts require a steadier mind than most drawing rooms. Lady Prudence gave a small, warning laugh. You must not encourage her. She already thinks too much of ledgers. Do you keep them? He asked Marianne. The question landed with more force than flattery. Marianne felt Lady Prudence's stare. She felt Cecilia's irritation. She also felt, unexpectedly, the clean edge of truth. I copy some figures for my aunt, she said. Nothing of consequence. That was not my question. His tone remained gentle. Do you understand them? Cecilia laughed. How could she not? She spends more time with bills than with bonnets. Marianne folded her hands. I understand enough to know when numbers have been made polite. Mr. Ardent stilled. Made polite. Rounded, postponed, renamed, or moved to another page until they appear less urgent. Lady Prudence's face lost colour and regained it almost instantly. Marianne, that is quite enough. Forgive me, Marianne said. She did not know to whom she spoke. Perhaps to her aunt. Perhaps to herself. Mr. Ardent set down his cup. No apology is required for understanding what others prefer not to read. The words should have comforted her. Instead they frightened her. A man who could hear that much from one sentence was not merely visiting. He was measuring. Lady Prudence seemed to reach the same conclusion. Cecilia, she said with sudden brightness, Mr. Ardent has not yet seen the conservatory. The camellias are still in bloom. Cecilia rose at once, recovering the field with silk and grace. You must allow me to show you. Marianne never cares for flowers unless they are listed in an account. Flowers die whether listed or not, Marianne said quietly. Cecilia's smile sharpened. You see? Hopelessly practical. Mr. Ardent stood because Cecilia had stood, but he did not step toward the door. Practical people are often the reason beautiful things survive long enough to be admired. The room went still again. Marianne hated the sudden ache behind her eyes. It was absurd. He had not praised her. Not truly. He had merely refused to laugh where everyone expected him to. For a woman who had lived too long on crumbs of fairness, it felt dangerously close to kindness. Lady Prudence moved toward the writing desk near the window, pretending to retrieve a calling card left beneath a paperweight. Marianne watched because she had learned to watch what Lady Prudence pretended not to care about. Her aunt opened the small drawer, slipped the sealed letter inside, and turned the key. Mr. Ardent saw that, too. His face did not change. Only his eyes did. A shade colder. A degree more certain. Cecilia reached the doorway and looked back at him through her lashes. Are you coming, Mr. Ardent? I promise the conservatory is more cheerful than accounts. In a moment, he said. Then he turned to Marianne. Lady Marianne, is the east roof still leaking? The question struck the room like a dropped glass. Lady Prudence went perfectly still. Cecilia's mouth opened, then closed. Marianne heard the fire shift in the grate. She had never mentioned the east roof. No one had. Not in polite conversation. Not to a guest. A gentleman with no real knowledge of Valecombe would not have asked. A gentleman with mere connections would not have known where to look. Marianne met his eyes, and for the first time that afternoon, the grey dress failed to make her feel hidden. Only after hard rain, she said. Then the damage is not yet beyond repair. His voice was quiet. It sounded less like a comment on the roof than a judgment on the house. Lady Prudence found her voice. Mr. Ardent, you are unexpectedly well informed. Not well enough, he said. That is why I came. No one spoke. Outside, the conservatory waited with its camellias, its warmth, and its carefully staged admiration. Inside, the locked drawer held its secret. Marianne looked at the man they had called Mr. Ardent and understood with a small, steadying chill that he had entered Valecombe House not to be entertained, but to learn what everyone was trying to hide. By 6 o'clock that evening, Valecombe House had dressed itself in candlelight and deception. The cracked plaster above the dining room cornice vanished into shadow. The thin places in the carpet disappeared beneath well-placed chairs. The silver shone as if no tradesman had ever waited for payment, and the long mahogany table held enough flowers to suggest abundance without requiring it to be true. Marianne understood the performance because she had helped arrange it. She had counted the candles, corrected the seating cards, and reminded the second footman that Mrs. Ellery, the rector's wife, preferred not to sit near the draught from the garden door. She had done all this in the same dove-grey dress, now brushed clean and made no more remarkable by effort. Lady Prudence had ordered her to change before dinner, then changed her mind after seeing Cecilia in ivory silk again, this time with a rose-coloured sash and pearls at her throat. No, Lady Prudence had said, after one measuring glance. The grey is suitable. Suitable meant useful. Suitable meant safe. Suitable meant Cecilia could glow without competition. At dinner, Marianne found herself placed halfway down the table between Mr. Ellery, the rector, and Mrs. Fane, a neighbour whose fortune was modest but whose opinions were not. Cecilia sat nearer the head, where Mr. Ardent could not fail to see her. Lady Prudence had managed that much despite the troubling conversation in the drawing-room. The east roof had not been mentioned again. Neither had the locked drawer, the sealed letter, or the way Mr. Ardent had looked at Valecombe House as if its walls had begun speaking to him. Marianne had tried not to think of it while dressing for dinner. She failed. A man did not ask about a leaking roof by accident. A man did not notice hidden letters unless he had reason to suspect them. And a man like Mr. Ardent, with his careful manners and his colder-than-courtesy gaze, did not come merely to admire camellias. Lady Marianne, Mr. Ellery said, leaning toward her with kindly blandness, your aunt tells me you have been much occupied with household matters. A useful employment for a lady in quiet circumstances. Very useful, Mrs. Fane said before Marianne could answer. A woman who has not the expectation of a brilliant settlement must cultivate usefulness. It is a mercy, really, to discover one's proper sphere early. Marianne laid her spoon beside her plate. How fortunate that mercy arrives in so many disguises. Mr. Ellery blinked. Mrs. Fane decided not to understand. Across the table, Cecilia laughed at something Mr. Ardent had not said. Her laughter floated brightly over the candles, delicate and timed to draw eyes. It drew most of them. It did not draw his. He was listening to Sir Edmund Pike, a local baronet with a loud voice and a louder waistcoat, explain the virtues of improvements to pastureland. Yet Mr. Ardent's gaze had shifted once, only once, when Mrs. Fane spoke of usefulness. It had been enough to tell Marianne that he had heard. She wished he had not. Being heard was becoming more dangerous than being ignored. The first course passed with polite talk and small cruelties hidden under sauces. Cecilia described a rout in Winchester where 3 gentlemen had begged her for the second dance. Lady Prudence added that Cecilia had always had a gift for drawing admiration without seeking it. Mrs. Fane said some young ladies were made for the centre of a room and others for the comfort of its edges. No one looked at Marianne directly when she said it. That was how such remarks gained their power. They made the wound and denied the hand. Mr. Ardent cut a piece of fish with unhurried precision. Edges are useful places, he said. One sees the whole room from them. Mrs. Fane smiled uncertainly. How very practical, Mr. Ardent. No, Cecilia said sweetly, turning her bright face toward him. Practicality belongs to Marianne. I should never steal her one distinction. There was a little laughter. Not much. Enough. Marianne felt it touch her, settle, and asked to be carried. She had carried worse. She reached for her glass, not to drink, only to give her hand something to do. The table's polished surface reflected Cecilia's pearls and Marianne's grey sleeve. Ivory and mist. Triumph and utility. The comparison had been arranged before anyone sat down. Cecilia saw Marianne looking and smiled. You must not mind us, cousin, she said. We only tease because you take everything so seriously. Do I? Always. Even your dress looks as though it has accepted a duty. Mrs. Fane gave a small laugh. Grey is a solemn colour for spring. Cecilia's eyes widened in mock concern. Oh, I think it suits her. Some women can wear colour. Others are overwhelmed by it. Marianne set her glass down. Then I am grateful to have survived muslin. Mr. Ardent's mouth moved slightly, but his expression did not break. Lady Prudence gave Marianne the look that meant enough. Enough wit. Enough presence. Enough reminder that she was not a chair. The footman came forward with the wine. He was young, new to the household, and so nervous his cuffs shook. Marianne had seen Cecilia speak to him near the sideboard before dinner, tilting her head in that coaxing way she used when she wished a servant to feel honoured by obeying. Now he moved around the table with the decanter, first to Sir Edmund, then to Mrs. Fane, then towards Cecilia. Cecilia turned at precisely the wrong moment. Her elbow brushed the stem of her glass. The red wine tipped. It should have fallen toward her own ivory silk. It did not. Her hand caught the base just enough to redirect it. The dark spill crossed the tablecloth and poured over Marianne's lap in a sudden, blooming stain. Silence came down so quickly that even the footman stopped breathing. The wine spread across the dove-grey muslin, deep red against mist, hot first, then cold. Marianne rose by instinct, but not too quickly. A lady did not startle. A lady did not accuse. A lady did not make a scene even when she had been made into one. Oh, Cecilia cried, pressing a hand to her breast. Marianne, I'm so dreadfully sorry. How clumsy of me. Her eyes were wide. Her voice trembled in all the correct places. Mrs. Fane clicked her tongue. What a pity. Sir Edmund muttered something about accidents. Lady Prudence's face hardened with a warning Marianne knew by heart. Do not embarrass us. Do not speak. Do not make truth inconvenient. Marianne looked down at the stain. The dress had been plain before. Now it was spectacle. The room had been waiting for this, she realized. Not the spill exactly, but the permission it gave. The permission to stare. The permission to pity. The permission to reduce her to the ruined fabric in her lap. It is nothing, she said. Her voice sounded calm. That, too, was practice. Pray do not trouble yourself. But it's your dress, Cecilia said, soft as a blade wrapped in ribbon. I know you have so few. Mr. Ellery's wife drew in a small breath. Mrs. Fane lowered her eyes with the satisfaction of a woman who could later claim she had been distressed. Lady Prudence stood. Marianne, go upstairs and have Adam see to it. Quietly, if you please. Quietly. Always quietly. Marianne took one step back from her chair. The young footman looked as though he might collapse from guilt, though he had done nothing but stand where he had been told to stand. She could defend him. She could accuse Cecilia. She could turn the table into a battlefield of glances and denials. Instead, the old lesson rose inside her. The family must present itself properly. Please continue your dinner, she said. I would not wish the soup to suffer for my sake. A few guests smiled because it allowed them to forgive themselves. Marianne turned toward the door. Then Mr. Ardent stood. His chair moved back against the carpet with a low sound that ended every whisper in the room. He did not hurry. He did not look at Cecilia first. That was what made it so terrible. He looked at the stain, then at Marianne's face, then at the footman, who seemed ready to be blamed by anyone with power enough to do it. Mr. Ardent took a folded handkerchief from his coat and held it out to Marianne with a bow shallow enough for courtesy and grave enough for judgment. He did not step too close. He did not make the offering intimate. He made it public. Lady Marianne. She stared at the white linen in his hand. In one corner, a dark letter had been embroidered with exact restraint. Above it, almost hidden in the stitching, was the shape of a small coronet. Her fingers closed around the cloth before she understood why her heart had changed its rhythm. Thank you, she said. There is no need, Cecilia began, with a nervous little laugh. It was only a silly accident. Mr. Ardent turned to her then. The room seemed to shrink. Was it? Cecilia's colour faltered. Lady Prudence spoke quickly. Mr. Ardent, I assure you, Cecilia is mortified. How fortunate, he said, that mortification leaves no stain on silk. No one moved. The candles burned. The red wine darkened on grey muslin. Mr. Ardent's voice remained even, but something in it made Mrs. Fane sit straighter and Sir Edmund stop reaching for his glass. A stain does not make a lady less worthy, he said. But cruelty reveals the whole room. Marianne felt the words before she understood them. They did not rescue her. They named what had happened. That was worse. That was better. The footman lowered his head. Mrs. Fane looked at her plate. Lady Prudence's expression froze into the polished blankness of a woman whose plans had been touched by fire. Cecilia's lips parted, but no sound came out. Marianne still had to leave the room. The dress still clung coldly to her knees. The shame still knew where to find her. Yet for the first time in years, she did not carry it alone. She curtsied, because manners were the last armor left to her. If you will excuse me. Mr. Ardent inclined his head. Of course. She walked to the door without rushing. Behind her, no one laughed. That was new. In the corridor beyond the dining room, the air felt cooler and more honest. Marianne pressed the handkerchief lightly against the stain, though it could do little good now. She heard the dining room door remain open behind her. Then Cecilia's voice, low and bitter, slipped through the crack like smoke. She ruins everything by looking wounded. Marianne stopped. She had not meant to. A moment later, another step sounded behind her, measured and controlled. Mr. Ardent had heard it too. Marianne remained in the corridor with the dining room light behind her and the long passage ahead, caught between the place where she had been humiliated and the stairs that promised only a different kind of shame. Her hands held Mr. Ardent's handkerchief against the ruined muslin, though the wine had already spread too far for linen to matter. She should have moved. She should have gone upstairs, summoned Adams, changed quickly, and returned before Lady Prudence could accuse her of drama. Instead she stood still because Cecilia's words had stripped away the last polite covering from the evening. She ruins everything by looking wounded. It was almost funny. Marianne had spent half her life making certain her wounds inconvenienced no one. Lady Marianne. Mr. Ardent's voice came from several paces behind her, low enough not to carry back into the dining room. Marianne turned at once, because propriety required it, then wished she had not. He had followed her only as far as the open corridor, leaving the dining room door wide behind him and stopping at a distance that no gossip could easily use. Even in that, he was careful. Especially in that. Sir, she said. You should return to dinner. I intend to. He looked once toward the open doorway, where the clink of silver had resumed too brightly. But not before I apologize. For what? For being present when they made cruelty into entertainment. The sentence landed with a strange precision. Marianne gave the smallest shake of her head. You are not responsible for my cousin's clumsiness. No, his gaze did not waver. Nor was it clumsiness. The handkerchief tightened in her fingers. She lowered her voice. It was only a dress. No, the one word. Quiet. Absolute. It was permission they gave themselves. Marianne looked down the passage because looking at him had become difficult. Along the wall hung portraits of Vale men who had inherited land, debts, pride, and the ability to leave women to manage the consequences. Their painted eyes watched without interest. They had always watched without interest. You are kind to say so, she said. I am not being kind. Then what are you being? Accurate. That almost undid her. Not the word itself, but the memory of the drawing room, the way he had said it before, as if truth did not need volume to be dangerous. Marianne drew a careful breath. Accuracy is rarely useful in a house that survives on arrangement. Is that what Valecombe survives on? Among other things. And what do you survive on, Lady Marianne? The question was too direct. Too gently asked. Good posture, she said. Timely silence. A talent for making myself less noticeable than furniture. His expression changed, not dramatically, but enough for her to regret the honesty. That is not survival. That is punishment made habitual. You speak as if you have known punishment. Most men in my position are taught to call it discipline. Your position, she asked before she could stop herself. The air shifted. He seemed to hear the question beneath the question, and for a moment the corridor held more than embarrassment. It held the sealed letter, the locked drawer, the east roof, the embroidered coronet beneath her thumb. Mr. Ardent did not answer immediately. Then he looked toward the stairs and said, "You need a maid." And an open door. That was all. It should not have warmed her. It did. He turned slightly and addressed a passing housemaid who had appeared with the anxious expression of a servant who had been sent and not told enough. "Will you be so good as to attend Lady Marianne upstairs and leave the dressing-room door open?" The maid bobbed a nervous curtsy. "Yes, sir." Marianne recognized her as Betsy, one of the younger maids, freckled and often frightened of Cecilia's temper. The girl's eyes darted to the wine stain, then away. Marianne gave her a small reassuring nod. "Thank you, Betsy. There is no urgency." "There is every urgency," Mr. Ardent said. Then, softer, "but no need for alarm." Betsy seemed to steady at that. Marianne did, too, though she disliked admitting it even to herself. They moved toward the small morning room near the foot of the back stairs, a room used for mending baskets and household lists when guests were not meant to see them. Its door stood open to the passage. A lamp burned on the table. Betsy fetched a basin of cool water and a cloth, then hovered near the doorway, close enough to satisfy propriety and far enough to pretend not to hear. Mr. Ardent remained in the corridor, beyond the threshold. He did not enter. Marianne stood just inside the room, the handkerchief still in her grasp, and tried to blot the stain with the composure of a woman performing an ordinary task. The wine had left a dark bloom across the dove-grey muslin. No effort would hide it. "You need not wait," she said. "I have given you my handkerchief. I should like to know whether it can be of use." "It cannot." "Then it has failed in its first duty." She looked at the white linen, now marked faintly pink from the wine. A dark letter had been worked in one corner, finely stitched, severe in style. Above it, the small coronet became clearer beneath the lamplight. Not a fancy ornament. Not a gentleman's vanity. A sign. A warning, perhaps. "This is very fine work," she said. "My mother disliked careless embroidery." "Your mother?" "She died some years ago." "I am sorry." "So am I." There was no self-pity in it. That made the loss sound older, deeper, and more carefully locked away. Marianne touched the embroidered letter. "A for Ardent." "Yes." "And the coronet?" Silence. Betsy dipped the cloth into the basin a little too loudly, then flushed. "Mr." Ardent's gaze moved briefly to the maid, sparing her any sense of blame, and returned to Marianne. "A family habit," he said. It was not an answer. Marianne was too practiced in omissions not to recognize one. "Your family must be important. All families believe themselves important." "That is not what I said." No, the faintest curve touched his mouth. "It is not." Marianne should have let the matter rest. She did let it rest, outwardly. Inwardly, the pieces moved with quiet discomfort. The locked drawer. Lady Prudence's strange caution. Mr. Ardent's knowledge of the east roof. His authority at the dining table. The coronet. "You knew about Valecombe before you came," she said. "Some things." "The roof?" "Yes." "The accounts?" "Enough to suspect they are not as cheerful as your aunt's flowers." That should have offended her. Instead it brought a tired little laugh to her throat. "The flowers are unpaid for, too." His eye sharpened, not with triumph but concern. "Does the household know that?" "The household knows everything. Servants simply have the courtesy not to announce it before soup." Betsy's mouth twitched despite herself. Marianne saw it and was absurdly grateful. "Lady Prudence should not have spoken to you as she did," Mr. Ardent said. "Lady Prudence speaks to me as she finds useful. And Lady Cecilia." Cecilia speaks as she has been taught to win. He studied her. You defend her? No. I understand her. There is a difference. There must be, or half of England would be unbearable. This time he smiled openly, though briefly, and Marianne felt the dangerous relief of making him do so. She turned back to the basin at once. The stain had lightened only at the edges. The center remained dark. It will not come out tonight, she said. Some things do not come out quickly. The words should have been nothing. They were not. Marianne pressed the cloth to the fabric and wished her hands were not so still. Stillness was the last refuge of a woman who could not afford to tremble. Mr. Ardent saw that as well. She knew he did. Lady Marianne, he said, what did you mean earlier, when you said no gentleman remembers grey? Her hand paused. I meant that your tea was growing cold. No, you did not. Then I meant that plain things are usually spared attention. Were you hoping to be spared mine? She looked toward the corridor. He stood outside the doorway, proper and impossible, a man both near enough to hear truth and far enough to preserve her name. I was hoping to be spared comparison. To Lady Cecilia. To expectation. The answer surprised her. It must have surprised him as well, because he said nothing. Marianne continued, because the evening had already taken too much from her and perhaps one truth more could not ruin what remained. Cecilia is beautiful in the way families can use. She is light in a room. She has been trained to become an answer to other people's ambitions. I was trained to make sure the room was ready when she entered it. And the grey dress. A surrender, according to Cecilia. According to you. Marianne looked down at the ruined muslin. A shield. A foolish one, it seems. Not foolish. His voice lowered. A shield proves there was something to withstand. That was the moment Lady Prudence appeared at the far end of the passage. She stopped when she saw them, Marianne in the open morning room with Betsy near the door, Mr. Ardent in the corridor, and the handkerchief between Marianne's fingers like evidence no one had yet named. Lady Prudence's eyes moved from the stain to the embroidered corner. Her expression hardened so swiftly that Marianne felt it like a draught. Mr. Ardent, Lady Prudence said, all polished alarm. How attentive of you. Only as far as propriety permits, he replied. The answer was mild. The warning inside it was not. Lady Prudence's smile grew thinner. Marianne, Adams is waiting upstairs. You must not keep our guest from dinner. I am ready, Marianne said. She held out the handkerchief to Mr. Ardent, then saw the mark on it and drew back. I am afraid I have spoiled it. You have not. The wine will stain. Then it will remember honestly. Lady Prudence's gaze flickered. Marianne folded the linen once, carefully, and kept it. She did not know why. Mr. Ardent inclined his head, first to her, then to Lady Prudence, with a courtesy so precise it felt like a blade returned to its sheath. I shall rejoin the others. He turned toward the dining room, leaving Marianne with the stained dress, the marked handkerchief, and the sudden certainty that Lady Prudence feared not what had happened that evening, but what Mr. Ardent had begun to see. By breakfast the next morning, the wine stain had become Marianne's fault. It waited for her in the morning room before she had even crossed the threshold, not on the dove-grey muslin, which Adams had carried away with the sorrowful air of a woman tending the injured, but in Lady Prudence's face. The room smelled of toast, coffee, and judgment. Cecilia sat beside the window in pale green, looking refreshed by sleep and innocence. Lady Prudence held a letter opener though no letters lay before her. That was how Marianne knew the conversation had been sharpened in advance. You are late, Lady Prudence said. Marianne glanced at the clock. By 3 minutes. By enough. Cecilia lowered her teacup. Aunt means that after last night, punctuality would have shown a more grateful spirit. Grateful. Marianne removed her gloves and placed them beside her plate. For the wine, or for the advice that I receive it quietly? Cecilia's eyes widened. There. You see? She is determined to be wounded. Lady Prudence tapped the letter opener once against the table. You embarrassed the family. Marianne sat very still. I did not spill the wine. No, but you made it memorable. That struck more deeply than Marianne wished. She had spent years learning that in houses like Valecombe, the wrong action was often forgiven if it belonged to the favored person. The wrong reaction was never forgiven if it belonged to the useful one. I left the room, she said. Quietly, as you requested. With Mr. Ardent's handkerchief. Cecilia's voice softened around the name. How touching it must have appeared. Marianne looked at her cousin. Would you have preferred I let the stain drip onto the carpet? I would have preferred, Lady Prudence said, that you not encourage a gentleman's notice in front of half the neighborhood. There it was. The charge had changed shape overnight. Last night, Marianne had been pitiable. This morning, she was dangerous. It was almost an improvement. I did not encourage him, Marianne said. He stood because others remained seated. Lady Prudence's gaze hardened. You will apologize to Cecilia before luncheon. For what? For making her accident appear intentional. Cecilia pressed a hand to her heart. I was mortified, Marianne. Truly. Then Mr. Ardent looked at me as if I had done something cruel. You can't imagine how distressing it was. Marianne took a breath. No. I imagine being drenched in wine while people laughed was a stronger education. The silence that followed was small and cold. Lady Prudence leaned back. Take care. Marianne had taken care all her life. She had taken care with words, steps, glances, household books, servants' mistakes, Cecilia's temper, Lady Prudence's pride, and the fragile appearance of a family running out of money behind polished silver. Care had not protected her. It had only made her easier to use. I will not apologize for being the person harmed, she said. That is all. Cecilia's beauty changed then. Not enough for anyone untrained to see, but Marianne saw it because she had learned to read rooms the way other women read invitations. The sweetness withdrew. Calculation remained. Before Lady Prudence could speak, the door opened and Betsy entered with fresh hot water for the urn. The young maid kept her eyes low. Her cap was slightly crooked, as if she had dressed in haste. Cecilia saw her and smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. There is the girl, she said. Betsy froze. Marianne's hand tightened around her napkin. What girl? Lady Prudence asked. Cecilia turned her innocent gaze toward her aunt. The footman was not near enough to jostle me last night. But Betsy was behind my chair before dinner. She must have set the glass too close to the edge when she helped arrange the table. Betsy went white. My lady, I didn't touch the wine glasses after Mrs. Hale set them. Are you contradicting Lady Cecilia? Lady Prudence asked. The maid's lips parted, then closed. In a great house, truth did not travel freely. It needed a patron, or it was punished for arriving. Marianne rose. Betsy did not set the glass. Cecilia looked at her. How could you know? Because I arranged the seating cards and checked the table before dinner. Mrs. Hale set the glasses. Betsy carried napkins. How attentive of you, Cecilia said. One might think you expected disaster. One often does, in this house. Lady Prudence's voice snapped. Marianne. Betsy trembled so visibly that Marianne stepped between her and the table. It was not dramatic. It was only 2 feet of movement. Yet it changed the room. If blame is needed, Marianne said, place it where the hand was. Cecilia stood. Are you accusing me? I am refusing to let a maid pay for what she did not do. The door was still open. Marianne realized too late that Mr. Ardent stood in the hall beyond it. He had not entered. He had not interrupted. He had heard enough. Betsy saw him and dropped into a curtsy so abrupt the water jug nearly tilted. He reached forward only far enough to steady the tray, then withdrew his hand at once. Careful, he said quietly. There is no need for another accident. Cecilia's color rose. Lady Prudence recovered with impressive speed. Mr. Ardent. We did not expect you so early. I was told the family breakfasted at 9. How unfortunate that you arrived during a household correction. His gaze moved to Betsy, then to Marianne, then to Cecilia. It sounded less like correction than selection. Lady Prudence smiled tightly. Servants must be accountable. So must ladies. No one spoke. Betsy looked as though the floor might open beneath her. Marianne turned to the maid. You may go, Betsy. Tell Mrs. Hale I shall speak to her later. Yes, my lady. The girl escaped with the tray, leaving behind the dangerous fact that Marianne had protected someone who could not protect herself. Mr. Ardent watched the door close. Then he turned back to Marianne with something like respect, though it was too controlled to be called admiration. Lady Marianne, I had hoped to see the grounds this morning. Your aunt tells me you know Valecombe better than anyone. Lady Prudence's eye sharpened. Cecilia would be delighted to show you the conservatory and south lawn. I am sure Lady Cecilia knows where the flowers are, he said. I am asking about the estate. Cecilia gave a light laugh. How solemn. Marianne will show you drains, roofs, and ledges if you encourage her. Then I shall be well informed. Lady Prudence could hardly refuse without admitting why she wished to. Within the quarter hour, Marianne found herself walking the gravel path beside Mr. Ardent, with Mrs. Hale the housekeeper following at a proper distance as chaperone. Cecilia had claimed a headache. Lady Prudence had claimed correspondence. Neither claim believed itself. Morning had lifted the mist from the lawns, revealing what candlelight concealed. The south terrace remained handsome from afar, but the balustrade had cracked in 2 places. The kitchen garden wall leaned slightly. One stable door hung badly, though it had been painted to appear sound. You see too much, Marianne said as they crossed toward the estate office. I was about to say the same of you. I see what must be repaired. And no one thanks you for it. Repairs are not romantic, Mr. Ardent. No. They are necessary. That word again. Necessary. It followed her like a plain shadow. In the estate office, the air smelled of paper, dust, and ink. Ledgers lay stacked on the long table. Marianne moved instinctively to the one that should not have been left open and closed it, but not before Mr. Ardent saw the columns. He did not reach for it. He did not need to. The rents are late, he said. Some tenants have had a difficult winter. And the tradesmen? She looked at him. Less patient. Your aunt hides the worst pages. My aunt hides anything that refuses to flatter her? His expression remained calm, yet his eyes had cooled. Does Lady Cecilia know? Cecilia knows the price of a gown and the value of appearing not to know it. He glanced toward the closed ledger. And you know the difference. Marianne touched the edge of the book. I know that the butcher has waited 6 weeks, the coal merchant 4, and Mrs. Hale has been stretching stores so carefully that Lady Prudence calls it economy rather than necessity. Why do you do it? Because someone must. That is not an answer. It is a sentence women are given when others want their labor without their authority. Marianne looked away, but not before the words found the place in her that still hoped not to be understood too quickly. You speak dangerously for a guest. Perhaps I am tired of being treated as one. She turned back. There it was again, the edge beneath the name, the sense that Mr. Ardent was not merely a man visiting Valecombe but a truth withheld in a dark coat. Before she could answer, a folded paper slipped from between 2 ledger pages and fell to the floor. Marianne bent first and picked it up. She saw only the broken seal before Mr. Ardent's gaze settled on it. Dark wax. A crowned impression. Lady Prudence had not hidden everything as well as she believed. Marianne's pulse changed. Mr. Ardent held out his hand, then stopped short of taking what she had not offered. Lady Marianne, he said quietly, I believe that letter was not meant to be found here. She looked from the seal to his face and understood that the morning had not brought peace after humiliation. It had brought the first crack in the lie that had invited him to Valecombe. The paper lay in Marianne's hand as if it had weight beyond its single folded sheet. The wax had been broken, but the impression remained clear enough where Lady Prudence had pressed it open. A coronet. The same severe little crown stitched above the letter on Mr. Ardent's handkerchief. The estate office seemed to grow smaller around her. The ledgers, the inkstand, the dusty window looking toward the kitchen garden, Mrs. Hale waiting properly near the open door, all of it became background to the truth forming with dreadful patience in Marianne's mind. Mr. Ardent did not take the letter from her. He waited, which was somehow more unsettling. A man with nothing to hide would have laughed. A man caught in an inconvenience would have explained too quickly. He did neither. "I should not read it," Marianne said. Her voice was steady because shock had not yet reached her hands. "No," he said. "You should not have been placed in a position where reading it became the only way to understand what was being done around you." She looked at him then. The morning light touched the side of his face and found no embarrassment there. Only resignation. "That is very near an answer, Mr. Ardent." "Yes. But not yet one." Mrs. Hale shifted softly at the door, and Marianne remembered the shape of the world. A woman alone in an estate office with a gentleman was a rumor waiting to be fed. But the door stood open. The housekeeper remained within sight. Mr. Ardent had kept every distance correct, every silence measured. He had been careful from the moment he followed her into the corridor the night before. Careful men were dangerous when one realized they were not careful for themselves. Marianne turned the paper enough to see the outer address. She did not unfold it. She did not need to. The words, written in Lady Prudence's sharp hand, were visible on the crease where the sheet had been refolded poorly. His Grace, the Duke of Northmere. For 1 second the title meant nothing. It was too large for the narrow room. Then it entered her completely. The air left her lungs with such quiet force that no one else could have heard it. "His Grace," she said. Mr. Ardent's face did not change. "Yes." "The Duke of Northmere." "Yes." Marianne looked at the letter, then at the man before her, then down at her own hand holding proof of a reality everyone in the house had hidden from her. "You are not Mr. Ardent." "I am Sebastian Ardent." "That is not what I asked." Something like respect moved through his eyes. "No, it isn't." The faint contraction made him sound, for the first time since his arrival, less like a judgment and more like a man. He inclined his head, not grandly, not theatrically, but with a gravity that altered the room. "I am Sebastian Ardent, Duke of Northmere." Mrs. Hale made a soft sound near the door and dropped a curtsy so deep it seemed to pain her knees. Marianne did not curtsy. She forgot. Then she remembered too quickly and moved, but the gesture came late and stiff. "Your Grace." The title tasted cold. It placed distance where conversation had been. It put marble beneath his feet and plain muslin beneath hers. It explained too much. His authority at dinner. His questions about the roof. Lady Prudence's reticule. Cecilia's careful radiance. The room had not been prepared for a useful connection. It had been prepared for a duke. A duke whom Marianne had contradicted over tea, answered about accounts, and allowed to hand her linen in a corridor while her dress was stained with wine. Heat rose to her face. "Lady Marianne," he said, "please do not look as if you have done something improper." "Have I not?" "No, I spoke to you as if you were a gentleman." "I am one, I hope." "I spoke to you as if you were not a duke." That was the most honest conversation I have had in this house. The words should not have softened anything. They did. Marianne folded the letter again, carefully, because her hands needed duty. "Lady Prudence knows." "She knows." "Cecilia?" "I believe she knows what she has been encouraged to believe. That she is being considered." He did not answer quickly enough. Marianne did it for him. For marriage. His silence confirmed it. There was no need for the vulgar word bargain. It stood in the room anyway. "Lady Prudence wrote to you about Cecilia," Marianne said. "She wrote of her beauty, her accomplishments, her connections, and the advantages of an alliance with the Vale family. We have very few advantages left. Your aunt presented them generously. My aunt presents empty rooms generously if the candles are lit." A faint, unwilling smile touched his face and vanished. "I had heard certain reports about Valecombe. Debts. Pressures. A wish for rapid elevation. I do not condemn need, Lady Marianne. But I distrust anyone who dresses need as virtue and sends a young woman forward as payment. Marianne felt the sharpness of that more keenly than she expected. Cecilia would not see it so. No. She has been taught that beauty is a fortune if one spends it correctly. And what were you taught? The question moved too close to the wound. Marianne looked toward the window. In the yard beyond, Betsy crossed with a basket of linen, head bent against the spring wind. To make sure the account balanced after everyone else had finished spending. That is not a small education. It is not one men ask for in a wife. Some men asked very foolish questions. She looked back before she could stop herself. He had said it plainly, without flirtation, and yet the words found the quiet place in her that had learned not to expect defense. It was dangerous that he knew where to place truth. It was worse that he did not seem to know he was doing it. She held out the letter. You should take this before I am accused of stealing what I was never meant to see. He accepted it at last, his fingers avoiding hers. You will not be accused by me. That may not be enough. It will be if the accusation reaches me. A duke speaking softly could sound more absolute than another man shouting. Marianne understood then why Lady Prudence feared him. Not because he was rich, though he was. Not because he held rank, though his rank could crush every pretension in Valecombe House. She feared him because he watched the small things. The shifted glass. The unpaid flowers. The maid who trembled. The woman in grey who had been placed where she could be useful but not seen. Why come hidden? Marianne asked. If your grace wished to refuse Cecilia, a letter would have sufficed. A letter would have refused a proposal. It would not have told me what kind of household believed the proposal appropriate. And now you know. I know more than I did. His gaze rested on her, not with pity, never quite that, but with an attention she had not learned how to bear. I did not come to judge you. But you have seen us. I have seen your aunt. She is family. I have seen Lady Cecilia. She is family as well. And I have seen you. Marianne gripped the edge of the table behind her. Then you have seen the least important part. No, the word came quickly, and that made it feel almost unguarded. Mrs. Hale looked down, as if giving them privacy without leaving propriety. Marianne wished the housekeeper were not there. Marianne was grateful she was there. Your Grace, she said, forcing the title into place, if Lady Prudence learns that I know, she will blame me for knowing. Then we shall not give her the pleasure yet. We? Yes. That is a dangerous word from a duke. It is a more dangerous word from a woman no one here listens to. She should have been offended. Instead, she felt seen so clearly that offense could not find room. He folded the letter and slipped it inside his coat. I will speak plainly. I will not allow your name to be used in any marriage negotiation. Not as obstacle, not as scapegoat, and not as a means to sharpen Lady Cecilia's advantages. Marianne gave a small, humorless laugh. You speak as though you can prevent my aunt from using people. I can prevent her from profiting by it with me. That was not romance. It was not rescue. It was something stronger than either, because it concerned what was right when no one had yet asked to be loved. The office door creaked. Both turned. No one stood there now. Only the empty passage. Mrs. Hale frowned. I thought I heard a skirt, my lady. A chill moved through Marianne. In a house like Valecombe, walls listened because people did. Mr. Ardent's expression became still. Who knew you were here? Lady Prudence. Cecilia. Half the household, by now. Then take care. Of what? Of anyone who gains more from your guilt than from your innocence. She did not need him to say Cecilia's name. It was already there between them. The hour moved after that with the strange speed of days that alter everything. Marianne returned the ledgers to order while Mr. Ardent asked no more questions than necessary. Mrs. Hale escorted her upstairs to change for luncheon, though Marianne had not asked. When they reached Marianne's small bedchamber, the door stood not quite as she had left it. A glove had fallen from the dressing table. A drawer was open by half an inch. Marianne went cold. Mrs. Hale saw it too. My lady. Marianne crossed the room and opened the drawer fully. the stained handkerchief was gone from where she had folded it beneath her gloves. For a moment she could only stare at the empty space. Then, from the corridor beyond, Cecilia's voice floated lightly toward Lady Prudence's room. "Aunt, you were right. She kept it." Marianne closed her eyes. The truth had entered Valecombe House at last, and Cecilia had already found a way to dress it as a scandal. By luncheon, Valecombe House had learned how to smile over a trap. Marianne knew it the moment she entered the dining room and saw that Lady Prudence had invited more witnesses than the meal required. Mr. and Mrs. Ellery were there from the rectory, both carefully dressed for an occasion that had been described as informal but arranged as if consequence sat at every place. Sir Edmund Pike had returned, loud waistcoat and all, along with Mrs. Fane and 2 ladies from the neighbouring estate who never missed a gathering where discomfort might ripen into news. The long table had been laid for elegance, but its beauty felt sharpened. Every glass was exactly placed. Every napkin folded like evidence. Marianne had changed into a pale brown walking dress because Adams had taken the grey muslin below to be treated again, yet she could feel the stain upon her as if fabric remembered what skin had endured. Lady Prudence greeted her with a serenity so polished it frightened her more than anger would have done. Cecilia sat near the centre of the table, fresh and bright in blue sprigged muslin, her golden head bent toward Mrs. Fane in confidential amusement. When she glanced up, her eyes touched Marianne and moved away with the satisfaction of a person who had already hidden the knife and was waiting for someone else to bleed. Sebastian stood near the window. Not Mr. Ardent anymore in Marianne's mind, though the room still used the lesser name. He turned when she entered, and for one brief instant the crowded room seemed to narrow into the space between what he knew and what he had not yet been told. Her drawer had been searched. His handkerchief was gone. Cecilia had found a way to make possession look like guilt. Marianne's first instinct had been to send him word, but every path between them had acquired eyes. Mrs. Hale had warned her with one grave look that Lady Prudence had set Betsy to polishing silver in the hall and a footman outside the morning room. There would be no private explanation before luncheon. Perhaps, Marianne thought as she took her seat, there had never been such a thing as private truth in Valecombe House. There were only truths waiting to be used. The meal began with soup and weather. It continued with church repairs, a coming assembly in Winchester, and Cecilia's charming complaint that country society gave a young lady too few opportunities to practice patience. Mr. Ellery spoke warmly of patience as a Christian virtue. Mrs. Fane replied that some women had too much practice in it. The remark drifted toward Marianne, though no name accompanied it. Sebastian's gaze lowered to his plate. He had heard. He always heard. That should have comforted her. Instead, it made the coming humiliation feel more inevitable. Cecilia waited until the second course had been served. She did not rush. True cruelty, Marianne had observed, often possessed excellent timing. Mrs. Fane was admiring the embroidery on Cecilia's sleeve when Cecilia sighed and said, "I fear I have been in such distress since last night that I hardly deserve admiration." Lady Prudence's hand paused near her glass. A signal given and received. "My dear child," Mrs. Fane said at once, "you must not reproach yourself. Accidents happen." "Do they?" Cecilia's voice trembled faintly. "I have tried to think so. Yet I cannot help feeling that my poor clumsiness was made to appear worse than it was." Marianne set down her fork. Across the table, Sebastian became very still. Lady Prudence gave a soft, sorrowing sound. "Cecilia, this is not a fit subject." "No, aunt, perhaps not. But silence allows misunderstandings to grow." Cecilia turned her blue eyes toward Marianne. "And I would never wish anyone to suffer from misunderstanding." The room sensed entertainment and pretended concern. Sir Edmund leaned back. Mrs. Fane leaned forward. Mr. Ellery looked into his soup as though hoping theology might rescue him. "What misunderstanding?" Marianne asked. Her voice was quiet. It had to be. If she sounded wounded, Cecilia would win twice. Cecilia touched the edge of her napkin. "Only that Mr. Ardent's kindness last night has been spoken of below stairs." Sebastian's eyes moved to her. "By whom?" Cecilia looked startled, then recovered. "Servants repeat everything, don't they? One cannot always know where a whisper begins. One often can, he said. Lady Prudence intervened with a controlled smile. Mr. Ardent, my niece merely means that appearances may become unfortunate. Whose appearances? Marianne asked. Lady Prudence looked at her. Yours, if you insist upon making the conversation plain. Marianne almost laughed. Plain. Even now, the word returned to serve them. Cecilia lowered her lashes. I don't accuse you, Marianne. Truly. But after Aunt discovered that you had kept Mr. Ardent's handkerchief, and after we learned that you had somehow become aware of his connection to Northmere, matters seemed less innocent. The table went silent. Not politely silent. Hungry silent. Marianne felt the floor steady beneath her shoes because something inside her had stopped moving. There it was. The handkerchief stolen from her drawer. The letter seen in the estate office. Two truths tied together until they resembled a lie. Sebastian looked at Marianne. In his gaze she saw surprise first, then calculation, then the terrible fact that he was remembering the estate office. He knew she had seen the letter. He knew she had learned the title before Cecilia spoke. He did not know that his handkerchief had been taken. Not yet. Cecilia saw the hesitation and entered it like a doorway. I thought nothing of the grey dress at first, she said softly. I even pitied her for choosing it. But now I wonder whether it was a performance. So plain, so modest, so wounded. What gentleman could resist defending such innocence? Mrs. Fane made a small sound of scandalized sympathy. Lady Cecilia, surely you do not mean, I don't know what I mean, Cecilia said. That is what pains me. Marianne turned toward Lady Prudence. You searched my room. Lady Prudence's face tightened. Do not be absurd. Then how did you discover what was in my drawer? Cecilia's eyes flashed. So you admit it was there? I admit Mr. Ardent lent me a handkerchief after you spilled wine on me. After you arranged to be seen as injured. Sebastian said nothing. The silence was brief. It lasted only a few seconds. To Marianne, it opened like a mile of cold road. She looked at him, not asking for rescue, not even asking for defense. She wanted only recognition. He had seen Cecilia's hand at the table. He had heard the whisper in the corridor. He had stood outside the estate office and told her he would not allow her name to be used. Yet now his eyes held the question Cecilia had planted. How did Marianne know? When did she know? Had she kept the handkerchief because it was a kindness, or because she understood too well whose linen she held? The room noticed his hesitation. Of course it did. Rooms like this lived on hesitation. Cecilia's mouth softened with triumph. Lady Prudence folded her hands. Marianne, she said, a simple explanation will end this. It was the oldest trap in the world. Explain yourself, so we may decide how much of you to believe. Marianne reached for the calm that had carried her through darker moments and found, beneath it, something harder. No, she said. Mr. Ellery looked up. My lady. Marianne rose slowly. No one told her to sit. Perhaps they were too startled. Perhaps they wished to watch her ruin herself properly. I will not explain myself as though your theft were my confession. Cecilia flushed. Theft? Yes. Marianne's voice remained low, but it carried. A handkerchief was lent to me in front of this table. It was later taken from my room. Now its presence is being used to suggest an intention I did not have. Lady Prudence stood as well. You forget yourself. I remember myself more clearly than you prefer. A sound moved through the room. Not applause. Not approval. Shock, which was sometimes the first cousin of truth. Marianne looked at Cecilia. As for the dress, if I wished to dazzle a man, I would hardly choose the garment everyone in this house has mocked since morning. Cecilia recovered quickly. Unless mockery was exactly what you wanted. Pity can be very effective. That hurt because it had been designed to. Marianne reached into the small pocket at her side and withdrew the folded handkerchief. Not the real one. A plain household linen Adams had pressed into her hand after finding the drawer open, saying only, "Carry something, my lady, so they don't see your hand shake." Marianne placed it on the table. Then let us have the whole truth, not only the part convenient to Lady Cecilia. Sebastian's head lifted. He saw the plain linen. He understood, at last, that the marked handkerchief was not with her. Shame moved across his face so quickly another person might have missed it. Marianne did not. That was the worst of it. He had not condemned her. He had only doubted her long enough for everyone else to hear. She stepped back from the table. You wanted me plain so I would not be seen. You wanted me stained so I would be pitied. Now you want me guilty so I may be dismissed. I am sorry to disappoint you. I am only tired. No one spoke. Even Cecilia had no immediate answer. Marianne turned toward the door, dignity holding her upright because pride alone would not have managed it. As she passed Sebastian, he said quietly, Lady Marianne. She stopped but did not look at him. Your Grace, she said, so softly that only he could hear. His breath changed. She had returned the title to him like a closed door. Then she walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the linen, the silence, and the first visible fracture in Valecombe's beautiful lie. Marianne reached the upper landing before her knees understood they were expected to keep carrying her. Below, the dining room remained sealed in that peculiar silence which followed an indecency too polished to be called by its name. No one came after her at once. That was almost merciful. It gave her time to cross the corridor, enter her small bedchamber, and close the door with a softness that felt like obedience even now. The room looked as it had an hour earlier, yet it had been changed by the half-open drawer, the glove fallen to the floor, and the absence of the marked handkerchief. A stolen thing left a shape behind. Marianne saw its shape everywhere. On the dressing table. In the crease of the coverlet. In the pale space inside her own chest where trust had briefly lived and then been corrected. Adams, the lady's maid who had served 3 generations of Vale women and judged them all in silence, stood beside the wardrobe with the dove-grey muslin draped over her arm. The stain had faded to a shadow, but it remained. My lady, Adams said, and in those 2 words Marianne heard what the servant was too well trained to say. Thank you, Marianne replied. For trying. It may lighten more with time. Some stains prefer witnesses. Adams looked toward the door. Lady Prudence sent word that you are to return below. Did she? And apologize. Marianne laughed once. It was not a happy sound, but it was not broken either. That surprised her. To whom? Adams folded the grey dress across the chair. The message did not specify, my lady. I believe it gives you a generous selection. The old maid's dry courage steadied Marianne more than sympathy would have done. She crossed to the wardrobe and removed a plain travelling gown of dark blue wool, serviceable enough for the road and respectable enough for an inn. I shall not return to apologize. Adams did not move. No, my lady. No, the word filled the room. Not loudly. Completely. Marianne touched the grey dress, running her fingers over the place where the wine had fallen. Last night it had been humiliation. This morning it had been evidence. By afternoon, if Lady Prudence had her way, it would become confession. Please pack my smaller trunk. Adams turned at once, as if she had expected this order for years and had only been waiting for Marianne to expect it of herself. Bath, my lady. Mrs. Alder is still there, I believe. Your mother's cousin. A sensible woman. She once told Lady Prudence that good breeding was no substitute for good conduct. Then Bath may be very restorative. Marianne almost smiled. Then the door opened without a knock. Lady Prudence entered as if privacy were a privilege Marianne had never been promised. Cecilia followed, pale blue skirts whispering behind her, a picture of wounded delicacy spoiled only by the brightness in her eyes. What is this? Lady Prudence demanded. Clothing, Marianne said. Folded. A common domestic phenomenon. Do not be impertinent. You will come downstairs at once. No, Cecilia gave a small gasp, perfectly measured. Marianne, don't make this worse. For whom? Lady Prudence closed the door. The click of the latch was sharp. You have embarrassed me before neighbours, before the rector, and before a gentleman whose goodwill this family cannot afford to lose. Marianne turned from the wardrobe. Then perhaps the family should have placed less of its hope on a stolen handkerchief. Cecilia's cheeks flushed. You left it where it could be found. In my drawer. A guilty person always returns to furniture. Marianne looked at her cousin for one long moment. She had thought Cecilia beautiful all her life. Not kind, not wise, not generous, but beautiful in a way that seemed beyond moral dispute. Now she saw the labor beneath it. The constant calculation. The fear hiding under each practiced smile. Cecilia had been taught that admiration was survival. Anything that threatened admiration became an enemy. Even a woman in grey. I am not your enemy, Marianne said quietly. Cecilia's eyes narrowed. You could have fooled me. That is because you mistake refusal for attack. Lady Prudence struck the floor once with the tip of her cane, though she did not need the cane and never had. Enough. You will return below, confess that you misunderstood Cecilia's distress, and thank Mr. Ardent for his excessive kindness. You will say you were overwrought. Women are forgiven for being overwrought far more readily than for being insolent. I was not overwrought. You were ungrateful. I was accused. Because you placed yourself in a position to be accused. There it was, the sentence at the root of every injustice she had been asked to swallow. If a woman could be wounded, then she must have stood too near the blade. Marianne lifted the dark blue gown from the bed and handed it to Adams. Pack that as well. Lady Prudence went very still. Where do you think you are going? Bath. Cecilia laughed. Dressed in righteous injury. Dressed for the road. You can't simply leave. Watch me. Lady Prudence's face tightened with real alarm. You have no independent household. No father. No brother. No husband. Your reputation lives under this roof. Marianne looked at the walls that had heard too much and protected too little. Then it has lived in poor company. The word shocked even her. Adams paused over the trunk. Cecilia stared. Lady Prudence's eyes hardened into something like fear. If you leave now, people will ask why. They are already asking why. You invited them to luncheon so they could. You foolish girl. Do you think the world will choose your version over mine? Marianne picked up her gloves from the dressing table. One was still creased from where it had fallen. I do not require the whole world. I require one room in which I am not asked to apologize for another person's lie. Lady Prudence moved toward her. And Mr. Ardent? Is this performance for him? The name struck its mark, but Marianne did not let it show. She thought of Sebastian's hesitation, brief and devastating. She thought of his face when she had said Your Grace. She thought of the promise he had made in the estate office, and how quickly silence had proved stronger than intention. No, she said. It is for me. That answer left no handle for Lady Prudence to grip. For a moment, the older woman seemed genuinely at a loss. Then she turned to Adams. You will not pack that trunk. Adams folded a chemise and laid it inside with exquisite calm. I am afraid I have already begun, my lady. The smallest flicker of satisfaction moved through Marianne. Not triumph. Something cleaner. A door opening inward. Within the hour, the trunk was strapped, a note had been written to Mrs. Alder in Bath, and Mrs. Hale had quietly arranged for a respectable widowed cousin from the village, Mrs. Penwick, to accompany Marianne as far as the first posting in. No one said the servants approved. Approval, like truth, could be dangerous below stairs. But when Marianne descended by the back stairs, Betsy stood near the passage with red eyes and a parcel of bread and cheese wrapped in cloth. For the road, my lady, the maid whispered. Marianne accepted it. You must not suffer for this. I won't, my lady, Betsy said, which meant she might. Marianne touched the girl's hand briefly, then let go. Tell Mrs. Hale I am grateful. Outside, the afternoon had turned bright and hard. The carriage waited near the stable yard, not the family barouche, but the older travelling chaise with one patched squab and two reliable horses. It suited Marianne. She was done being displayed. Adams helped place the trunk. Mrs. Penwick settled herself inside with a basket, a shawl, and the expression of a woman prepared to disapprove of any person who deserved it. Marianne had one foot on the carriage step when Sebastian crossed the yard. He was hatless, as if he had come too quickly for form. Yet he stopped several feet away, mindful even now of servants, open air, and a woman's name. That care hurt more after the luncheon. Lady Marianne. She did not turn fully. Your Grace. His jaw tightened. Please do not let that be the only thing you call me now. It is the safest thing. I was wrong. The words came without ornament. Not in what I knew. In what I allowed others to see me question. Marianne looked at him then. You allowed me to stand alone long enough for them to believe I deserved it. Yes. No defense. No explanation. That almost weakened her. She could not afford it. You saw me plainly, she said. Then you doubted the plainest thing about me. The sentence passed between them like the closing of a gate. Sebastian took the blow without looking away. I will clear your name whether you return or not. It was never yours to clear. No. But I helped muddy it by silence. Behind him, at an upper window, Marianne saw a pale movement. Cecilia watching. Of course. Valecombe never wasted an audience. Marianne lifted her chin. Then begin with the people who stole from my room. I will. And the servants they will blame when cornered. I will protect them. You cannot protect everyone. No, he said. But I can stop pretending observation is enough. That reached her. She wished it had not. For one dangerous second, she saw not the Duke, not the judge in a dark coat, but the man who had stood in a corridor and named cruelty when everyone else called it clumsiness. Then she remembered the silence at luncheon. Memory saved her. I am going to Bath. With Mrs. Penwick. Yes. Then take my carriage. It is better sprung. No, Lady Marianne, no, she repeated, gentler but firmer. If I leave under your protection, they will only write another lie for me. He absorbed that, and she saw the moment he understood. Protection could become another cage if it arrived without permission. He stepped back. Then go under your own choice. Marianne placed her hand on the carriage door. That is what I am trying to do. He bowed, not as a duke dismissing a lady, but as a man acknowledging a decision he had no right to command. Mrs. Penwick, he said, raising his voice just enough, I trust you will send word if the road proves difficult. The widow sniffed. I have managed worse roads than Hampshire's, sir, and worse men than road agents. A flicker of startled amusement crossed Sebastian's face. Marianne almost smiled. Almost. Then she entered the carriage. As the chaise moved forward, she looked once toward Valecombe House. It stood polished, composed, and rotten in all the places visitors were not meant to see. At the upper window, Cecilia's pale shape vanished. In the yard, Sebastian remained still. Marianne did not wave. She kept her hands folded over Betsy's parcel and let the carriage carry her away from the house that had taught her silence, toward a road where silence, at last, would be her own to break. The carriage had not yet disappeared beyond the lime trees when Sebastian turned back toward Valecombe House and understood, with a clarity that shamed him, that observation had become cowardice the moment Marianne was left to bear what he had only measured. He had come to Hampshire believing himself prudent. He would watch, listen, withhold his rank, and discover whether Lady Prudence Vale's flattering letters concealed desperation. He had told himself restraint was justice. Yet in the dining room, restraint had looked very much like doubt. Marianne had stood before accusation with nothing but her name, and he had hesitated because one part of Cecilia's lie touched a fact. Marianne had learned his title. She had seen the letter. She had not told him at once. For a colder man, that might have been enough. Sebastian had spent years being trained to distrust convenience, to examine motives, to suspect charm, and to accept evidence over sentiment. But Marianne had never offered charm. She had offered truth even when it cost her. That was the pattern he had failed to honor quickly enough. When he entered the house again, the dining room had already begun pretending nothing had happened. Sir Edmund spoke too loudly about horses. Mrs. Fane whispered too softly to be innocent. Mr. Ellery looked miserable. Lady Prudence stood near the sideboard, pale with fury beneath her composure, while Cecilia sat with her hands folded in her lap and the fragile look of a woman injured by the consequences of her own design. Sebastian did not sit. Lady Prudence, he said, your guests may wish to withdraw to the drawing room. Lady Prudence's brows lifted. Mr. Ardent, this is still my house. Then you may choose the room. But the conversation will occur. The rector's wife rose at once, grateful for instruction that sounded almost like rescue. The neighbors followed, rustling toward the drawing room with the hungry reluctance of people leaving a closed door behind them. When only Lady Prudence, Cecilia, and the closest household staff remained near the passage, Sebastian looked at Cecilia first. How did Lady Marianne learn my connection to Northmere? It was the wrong question. He knew it as soon as he asked it. Cecilia saw the opening and took it. Then she did know. Lady Prudence folded her arms. You see our concern. Answer me. Cecilia lowered her eyes. I cannot say. Perhaps she read what was not hers. Perhaps she watched Aunt's correspondence. Marianne is very attentive to matters that don't concern her. Sebastian felt the old habit move in him. Gather the fact. Follow the breach. Identify the moment of access. Marianne had found the letter in the estate office. That much was true. It would be easy to walk down that narrow path and ignore who had built it. But then he remembered the brown walking dress, the plain linen placed on the table, and the way Marianne had said your grace like a title returned with pain. She had not tried to use his name. Cecilia had. No, he said. Cecilia looked up. No? That is not the question that matters. Lady Prudence's hand tightened around the back of a chair. I beg your pardon. Lady Marianne may have learned something that was hidden from her. I wish to know who entered her room, who removed my handkerchief, and who decided to turn a lent courtesy into an accusation. Cecilia's color shifted. You make it sound so ugly. It was ugly before I described it. I didn't enter her room. I did not ask whether you entered it with your own hands. The silence struck her. She looked, too quickly, toward the corridor where servants passed when summoned and vanished when blamed. Sebastian turned. Mrs. Hale. The housekeeper appeared from the passage, as if she had been waiting for a summons she dreaded. Sir. Lady Prudence snapped, Mrs. Hale, you will remember your position. Sebastian did not raise his voice. Mrs. Hale will remember that no servant in this house is to be dismissed, threatened, or punished for speaking truth in my hearing. Lady Prudence laughed once. You grant protections very freely for a guest. Not freely. Deliberately. Mrs. Hale looked from him to Lady Prudence. In her face Sebastian saw the arithmetic of service. Wages. References. Dependence. Fear. He stepped back from the table, giving her more room than she had been given by her own mistress. I ask only what you know yourself. The housekeeper drew a breath. Lady Marianne's chamber was found disturbed after luncheon, sir. Cecilia's voice sharpened. Found by whom? By myself and Lady Marianne. That proves nothing. No, my lady. Mrs. Hale kept her eyes forward. But Betsy had been sent upstairs before then. Lady Prudence's expression hardened. Sent by whom? Mrs. Hale did not answer. She did not need to. Cecilia stood. This is intolerable. You are allowing servants to invent stories because Marianne has always made them adore her. Adoration is not required for observation, Sebastian said. Betsy will come here. Lady Prudence objected. Cecilia protested. Sebastian ignored both. When Betsy entered, she looked so frightened that Sebastian's anger changed shape. It became colder, more useful. The girl's hands twisted in her apron. My lord, she whispered, then corrected herself in panic. Sir. Lady Prudence noticed the slip. So did Cecilia. Sebastian saw their fear sharpen and knew another truth had been living below stairs. They knew enough of his rank to fear its discovery, and yet they had gambled on Marianne's ruin. "Betsy," he said, "you are not accused. You are asked." The maid's eyes filled. "I didn't want to, sir." Cecilia made a small sound. "This is absurd. What did you not want to do?" Sebastian asked. Betsy looked at Mrs. Hale, then at the floor. "Lady Cecilia told me to fetch the handkerchief from Lady Marianne's drawer. She said it was to be returned to you, sir, because Lady Marianne had no right to keep it. I didn't know it would be spoken of at luncheon." "Did Lady Marianne ask you to take it?" "No, sir." "Did she show it to anyone?" "No, sir." "Did she boast of knowing who I was?" Betsy shook her head so hard her cap trembled. "Never, sir. She told Mrs. Hale not to speak of the letter because she didn't want trouble for the house. There it was. Not innocence alone. Mercy." Marianne had held a truth that could have humiliated her aunt and had chosen silence until silence became a weapon against her. Sebastian looked at Lady Prudence. "You hid my letter." Lady Prudence's chin rose. "I managed correspondence for the benefit of my family. You concealed my title from the one person here who might have dealt honestly with it. Marianne had no part in the matter. Yet you allowed her to be accused when she discovered it." Cecilia's eyes flashed with tears she had summoned too late. "You speak as though she is noble and I'm monstrous. I only wanted what Aunt promised was possible. I only wanted to be seen." The words might have moved him if they had not stood atop Marianne's stolen dignity. "Then you should have begun by seeing someone else clearly." Cecilia turned away. Lady Prudence's composure cracked at the edge. "Mr. Ardent, you forget yourself." "No," he said. "That has been the problem. I remembered myself too well and acted too little." He looked to Mrs. Hale. "Send for the steward." Mr. Griggs arrived within minutes, a narrow man with ink on one cuff and the wary air of a person accustomed to numbers no one wished to hear. He confirmed what Sebastian had already suspected. The butcher was unpaid. The coal merchant had extended credit twice. The east roof had been deferred through winter. Marianne had copied the ledgers, corrected errors, and written polite requests for patience that Lady Prudence signed as if they were her own. Lady Marianne kept matters from worsening, Mr. Griggs said, eyes lowered. "She never said so." "Of course she did not," Sebastian replied. "She was too busy doing it." He dismissed them gently, one by one, with the assurance that no one would suffer for what had been said. Only when they had gone did he face Lady Prudence and Cecilia again. "Lady Marianne left this house under accusation. She will return, if she returns, to truth spoken before those who heard the lie." Lady Prudence stared at him. "You would expose a family over a handkerchief?" "No. Over a pattern." He took his hat and gloves from the hall table. The house had gone unnaturally quiet around him, as if even the portraits had begun listening. "Where are you going?" Cecilia asked, and for the first time she sounded young. "To apologize before I presume to defend." He walked out before either woman could answer. In the stable yard, the groom brought his horse with unusual speed. Sebastian mounted and turned toward the Bath Road, where Marianne's carriage had vanished into the afternoon. The wind carried the damp scent of fields and distance. He had ridden faster roads in worse weather, but never with a heavier understanding. He was not carrying a proposal. He was not carrying rescue. He was carrying the first honest thing he owed her, and it had come late. The first posting in on the Bath Road stood at a bend where the lane widened just enough for tired horses, damp wheels, and travellers pretending their journeys were ordinary. Marianne had meant to go farther before stopping, but Mrs. Penwick had declared the left wheel sounded offended, and the driver, after a cautious inspection, had admitted the older chaise would benefit from rest if the ladies wished to reach Bath with both dignity and axle intact. So Marianne found herself in the public parlour of the Crown and Thistle with a cup of tea cooling before her, a trunk in the passage, and the peculiar emptiness that followed decisive action. Leaving Valecombe had required courage. Sitting still afterward required something worse. The room smelled of coal smoke, wet wool, and horses. A clock ticked above the mantel with an insistence that made every minute feel observed. Mrs. Penwick sat near the window, knitting with the grim competence of a woman prepared to defend respectability by force of posture alone. "You are not drinking," she said. "The tea is very strong. Tea ought to be. Weak tea is a moral failure." Marianne almost smiled. She had forgotten that her mother's cousin spoke as though every household object could be judged by character. Outside, the horses stamped in the yard. A boy crossed with a bucket. Two commercial gentlemen murmured over ale near the far wall, far enough away to satisfy propriety and near enough to remind Marianne that she was not in a private drawing-room where reputation could be strangled behind closed doors. Public rooms had dangers, but they also had witnesses. For the first time since luncheon, witnesses felt like protection rather than threat. Still, her hands were cold. Not from the weather. From memory. She saw Sebastian's face when she had placed the plain linen on the table. She saw the hesitation before he understood. She heard herself say "Your Grace," not with deference, but with all the distance she could gather. The title had wounded them both. That, she thought, was foolish. A duke could not be wounded by a woman with one trunk and no household of her own. Yet the look in his eyes as she stepped into the carriage had followed her farther than Valecombe's gates. Mrs. Penwick's needles clicked. "You are thinking of the gentleman." "I am thinking of the accusation." "Same road, perhaps." "Different ditch." Marianne lifted the tea and set it down again. "He did not make the accusation." "Did he stop it?" Marianne looked toward the window. Rain had begun to fleck the glass, thin and silver, though the sky had not yet committed itself to a storm. "Not quickly enough." Mrs. Penwick nodded as if that settled an account. "Then he owes you speed now." At that moment, hoofbeats entered the yard at a pace that made the ostler shout. Marianne knew before the horse stopped. She disliked that she knew. Her body recognized urgency before her pride could forbid it. A moment later, the innkeeper appeared at the parlor door with a card held on a small tray, his expression altered by the discovery that the wet rider outside was not the sort of gentleman one kept waiting without consequence. Mrs. Penwick took the card before Marianne could move. Her brows rose. "Mr. Ardent asks whether Lady Marianne Vale will receive him in the public parlor, with Mrs. Penwick present." Marianne closed her eyes briefly. Even now, he had chosen the correct door, the correct room, the correct safeguard. No whispered plea in a passage. No command. No assumption that apology granted access. "I will receive him," she said. Her voice did not betray her. Mrs. Penwick looked faintly satisfied. "Good. I was beginning to find the afternoon dull." Sebastian entered without his hat, rain darkening the shoulders of his coat and the ends of his hair. He stopped just inside the door and bowed first to Mrs. Penwick, then to Marianne. He did not come farther until Mrs. Penwick gestured to the chair across from them with the authority of a dowager duchess, though she was merely a widow with sharp needles. "You may sit, sir." Publicly. "Thank you, Mrs. Penwick." He Saturday. Not too near. Marianne noticed that. She hated that she noticed everything. For a few seconds, none of them spoke. The clock took 3 loud ticks. Sebastian looked at Marianne, and all the careful command she had seen at Valecombe seemed stripped down to something plainer. Not weakness. Accountability. "I have spoken to Mrs. Hale, Betsy, and Mr. Griggs," he said. "The handkerchief was taken from your drawer at Lady Cecilia's direction. Lady Prudence concealed my letter. The wine was no accident, whatever word they prefer. Your aunt's debts explain her urgency, though they do not excuse it." Marianne felt the confirmation settle into her without surprise. "You found the truth quickly." "Not quickly enough." Mrs. Penwick made a small approving sound and returned to her knitting. Marianne looked down at her gloved hands. "Did you come to tell me I was right?" "No," he paused. "I came to tell you I was wrong." The simplicity of it disturbed her more than eloquence would have done. "About what?" "About the few seconds in which I allowed a true fact to obscure a true character." She looked up. He did not look away. "You had learned my title. You had seen the letter. I let that knowledge make me hesitate when Lady Cecilia twisted it against you. Would you have believed me without proof?" The question came more softly than she intended. It had been waiting inside her since the dining room. Sebastian's answer did not come quickly, and because it did not, she knew it would be honest. "Not quickly enough," he said. "And that is my shame." Marianne turned toward the rain-streaked window because the room had blurred at the edges. She did not wish to cry. Tears would make the apology too easy for him and too humiliating for her. "I did not tell you about the letter because I did not want to expose the household before I understood what was happening." "I know." "No. You know now." He accepted the correction with a slight bow of the head. "Yes. I know now." Mrs. Pennick's needles continued their steady work. The two commercial gentlemen had gone silent behind their ale, pretending not to listen and failing like amateurs. Sebastian lowered his voice, though every word remained clear. "I will return to Valecombe and speak the truth before those who heard the lie. Whether you come back or continue to Bath, your name will not remain in their keeping." Marianne drew a slow breath. There it was again, protection offered like a bridge. She had spent too many years being carried where other people wished to place her. Even rescue could become another room if it did not leave space for a door. "You cannot give my name back to me," she said. "No, you can only tell them what you saw." "Yes. And what you failed to see soon enough." Pain crossed his face. He did not hide it. "Yes." The answer loosened something in her, not forgiveness, not yet, but the tight knot that had made breathing feel like work. She looked at him fully. The rain had left a drop on his cuff. His gloves were unfastened. He had ridden hard enough to forget appearances, and yet he had remembered hers. That contradiction was becoming difficult to despise. "Why does it matter so much to you?" she asked. "You may refuse Cecilia and leave Valecombe. The rest is unpleasant, but it is not your ruin. Because I entered that house to measure character, and when character stood before me, I measured evidence first." His voice roughened. "Because you should not have needed to prove what I had already seen." Silence held the room. Even Mrs. Pennick's needles stopped. Marianne felt, with unexpected force, the ache of being understood after the harm rather than before it. Late understanding did not erase pain. But it was not nothing. "If I return," she said, "it will not be because you ask it. I know. It will not be because Valecombe deserves explanation. It does not. And it will not be because I wish to be pitied by a room full of people who enjoyed the first performance." "Then why?" She looked toward the window, where the rain had become steadier. A road could disappear 1 mile at a time beneath weather. A reputation could disappear in a single room unless someone held it still. "Because Cecilia put my name in her mouth," Marianne said. "And I find I no longer care to leave it there." Mrs. Penwick resumed knitting with renewed vigor. "Excellent." Sebastian stood, not in triumph, but because the decision was hers and had been made. "I will arrange horses." "No," Marianne said. He stopped. "No. We will return in the same chaise. Mrs. Penwick and I. If I arrive in your carriage, the lie will dress itself again before we reach the steps." A faint, grave admiration entered his eyes. "You are right. I have been right before. It was inconvenient then, too." For the first time since he entered, the corner of his mouth moved. "I am learning to value inconvenient accuracy." Marianne reached for the small parcel Betsy had given her. The cloth still held the warmth of bread near its center. She thought of Betsy's trembling hands, Mrs. Hale's guarded courage, Adam's folding the trunk despite Lady Prudence's command, and all the quiet people who had known the truth before anyone important cared to ask. "There is one more condition," she said. "Name it." "The servants are not to pay for what they told you." "They will not." "Do not promise as a gentleman if you can only enforce as a duke." His expression changed. Something like fierce respect replaced regret. "Then I promise as both." Marianne stood. Mrs. Penwick rose with her, gathering her shawl. Outside, the driver was already looking mournfully at the rain, but the horses had rested and the road remained passable. Sebastian moved to the door and opened it, then stepped aside. He did not offer his arm. "Not here. Not yet." The omission spoke more carefully than touch. As Marianne passed him, he said quietly, "Lady Marianne." She paused. "Yes?" "Thank you for allowing me to be late rather than absent." She looked at him for one moment. "Do not make a habit of either, Your Grace." This time, the title did not close a door. It marked one they both knew he had not yet earned the right to enter. Outside, rain silvered the yard and darkened the road back to Valecombe. Marianne lifted her skirt clear of the mud and walked toward the waiting chaise, not rescued, not absolved, not softened into surrender, but returning by choice to the room that had mistaken silence for consent. Valecombe House did not look surprised to see Marianne return. It stood beneath the thinning rain with its old red brick darkened, its windows bright, and its secrets still arranged behind curtains as if weather, lies, and women with trunks could all be managed by proper lighting. The chaise rolled to a stop before the side entrance because Marianne had asked for it. She would not descend like a banished niece sneaking back through the servant's door, but neither would she make a grand entrance for the benefit of Cecilia's appetite. "Mrs. Penwick stepped down first, looked up at the house, and said, "It has the expression of a person who expects to be forgiven without apologizing." Marianne almost smiled. "That is a family trait." Sebastian had ridden ahead and sent word that those who had heard the accusation were to gather in the drawing-room. He had not asked permission. Marianne knew that from Lady Prudence's voice before she saw her aunt. It carried through the hall in tones polished thin by fury. "This is outrageous. I will not have my house treated as a magistrate's office." Sebastian's reply was too low to hear. That made it more alarming. Men who needed volume often had no authority. Sebastian had no need of it. Adams met Marianne at the side passage with the trunk already opened by footmen and the dove-grey muslin folded across her arms. The stain had faded but not disappeared. It remained as a cloudy shadow where the wine had bloomed, no longer scarlet, not clean either. "I thought you might want it, my lady," Adams said. Marianne touched the cloth. For a moment she felt again the dining room, the laughter that pretended not to be laughter, the cold weight of red wine, Sebastian rising too late in one room and soon enough in another. She could wear the dark blue travelling gown. It would be safer. It would let the matter become words rather than evidence. Then she imagined Cecilia calling the grey a costume and felt something within her settle into place. "Yes," Marianne said. "I will wear it." "Mrs. Penwick gave a curt nod. "Good. Never let fools choose which proof embarrasses you." 10 minutes later, Marianne stood before the glass in the small morning room, not her bedchamber, because she would not give Lady Prudence another opportunity to accuse her of hiding. Adams fastened the last button. The grey dress was plain as ever. The faint stain rested in the fabric like a memory that refused to be improved for company. Marianne looked at her reflection and saw, not a woman made smaller, but one stripped of decoration until only the truth remained. When she entered the drawing-room, conversation died so completely that the fire seemed indecently loud. Every person from luncheon had returned, drawn by invitation, rank, curiosity, or fear of missing what might later be called unfortunate. Mr. and Mrs. Ellery sat near the hearth. Mrs. Fane occupied the edge of a sofa with the alert sorrow of a woman already composing the gentlest possible version of malice. Sir Edmund Pike stood by the mantel, unable to decide whether outrage or entertainment better suited his waistcoat. Mrs. Hale, Betsy, and Mr. Griggs remained near the door with the guarded stillness of servants brought into the room but not yet assured they would survive it. A family solicitor, Mr. Harbury, thin and grave, stood beside the writing desk with a leather case under one arm. Lady Prudence was near the centre of the room, rigid with the humiliation of having guests in a scene she had not staged. Cecilia sat in the blue chair Marianne had once been expected to admire from the shadows. She wore ivory again, which was either bravery or stupidity. Her hands were folded. Her eyes were bright. Then she saw the grey dress, and the brightness sharpened into fear. Sebastian stood by the window. He turned when Marianne entered, and something passed across his face that no one else could claim. Not relief alone. Not admiration alone. Recognition. He stepped forward half a pace, then stopped. He did not offer his arm. He did not claim her before the room could hear her. Instead, he bowed, and the gesture gave her space rather than taking it. "Lady Marianne." "Your Grace," she said. This time she did not whisper it. The room heard. The effect was immediate. Mrs. Fane's lips parted. Sir Edmund straightened. Lady Prudence's eyes closed for one brief, furious second. Cecilia's face lost its careful innocence and found another mask too quickly. "Your Grace?" Mrs. Ellery murmured. Sebastian did not answer yet. His title had entered the room, but he let silence do its first work. Marianne moved to stand near the table where, only hours earlier, she had placed a plain linen in place of the stolen handkerchief. "I have returned," she said, "because my name was used in this room as though it belonged to anyone willing to improve a story with it." Lady Prudence stepped forward. "Marianne, you will not address guests in this theatrical manner." Sebastian's voice cut across hers, calm and final. "Lady Prudence, Lady Marianne will finish." That was all. It was enough. Lady Prudence stopped. Marianne did not look at Sebastian. If she looked, courage might become gratitude too soon, and gratitude might soften the blade she needed. "I was accused of keeping a gentleman's handkerchief for a purpose I did not have. I was accused of wearing this dress as a performance. I was accused of turning another person's cruelty into my advantage." Cecilia gave a fragile laugh. "Cruelty? Marianne, don't you think that's a strong word for an accident?" Marianne looked at her cousin then. Not with anger. Anger would have pleased Cecilia by making the matter seem equal. Marianne looked at her with the clear exhaustion of a woman who had finally stopped translating harm into manners. No, the single word made Cecilia blink. Marianne continued. "The wine fell on this dress. Mr. Ardent lent his handkerchief in front of witnesses. That handkerchief was later taken from my drawer. At luncheon, its theft was used as if it were my confession." Lady Prudence's voice sharpened. "You cannot prove theft by repeating the word." "I am not finished." Marianne heard her own voice and scarcely recognized it. It was not loud. It did not need to be. "I also learned that His Grace's full title had been hidden from me. I learned it by seeing a letter left among estate papers I had been asked to manage for years. I did not announce it. I did not use it. I did not approach His Grace with it. I remained silent, not because I was guilty, but because I did not yet know how much of this house's desperation had been dressed as family duty." Mr. Harbury's gaze moved sharply toward Lady Prudence. Mr. Griggs lowered his eyes. Mrs. Hale stood straighter. Cecilia's fingers tightened over one another. "This is absurd," she said. "You make yourself sound noble because you were caught." "Caught doing what?" Marianne asked. Cecilia opened her mouth, but no answer came quickly. Marianne took one step closer to the center of the room. It was the place Cecilia preferred. It was the place Lady Prudence had reserved for beauty, title, money, and performance. Marianne stood there in grey. "If I meant to trap a duke," she asked, "why did you need to search my room to prove it?" The silence that followed was different from all the silences before it. It had weight. It had direction. It moved toward Cecilia. Mrs. Fane looked at Lady Prudence. Mr. Ellery looked at Betsy. Sir Edmund looked as if he had at last discovered a scandal too clear to enjoy comfortably. Lady Prudence spoke first. "No one searched your room." Betsy made a small sound near the door. Cecilia turned on her. "Don't you dare." Sebastian stepped forward then, not between Marianne and Cecilia, but beside the space where truth had been made to stand. "Lady Cecilia." His voice was soft enough to frighten everyone. "Be very careful what you ask a servant to carry for you now." Cecilia rose. The blue chair behind her scraped faintly against the floor. "This is intolerable. I won't be lectured by a woman who was never meant to be part of this at all." Marianne held her gaze. "Part of what?" Cecilia's breath quickened. The room leaned toward her without moving. For the first time, her beauty could not save her from the shape of her own words. "You were never meant to be seen by him at all." Cecilia's words remained in the room after her voice had failed her. "You were never meant to be seen by him at all." No one had to ask who him meant. Every face turned, not at once but in a slow surrender, toward Sebastian. He stood beside the window with the rain-grey light behind him, no longer a guest in a country house, no longer a gentleman whose importance could be trimmed to suit Lady Prudence's plans. The silence altered around him as people began to understand what their manners had delayed. Lady Prudence's hand moved toward the back of a chair. Cecilia looked suddenly younger, as if the beauty arranged upon her had been borrowed and was now being called back. Sebastian took one step forward. "For the sake of clarity," he said, his voice quiet enough that no one could pretend not to listen, "I am His Grace, Sebastian Ardent, Duke of Northmere." The room went still in the way rooms become still when rank enters not as decoration, but as judgment. Mrs. Fane made a small sound and sank lower into the sofa. Sir Edmund's face lost its comfortable redness. Mr. Ellery bowed awkwardly from his chair. Betsy dropped into a frightened curtsy before Mrs. Hale steadied her with one hand. Lady Prudence closed her eyes. When she opened them, she tried to smile. "Your Grace, surely there is no need for such formality among friends." "We are not among friends," Sebastian said. "We are among witnesses." The word struck harder than anger would have done. Marianne stood in the center of the drawing room in the grey dress, feeling the faded wine stain like a hand placed over an old wound. She had imagined truth as something loud. Instead, it arrived with perfect control. Sebastian turned to the room. "Lady Prudence wrote to me proposing, with great delicacy and greater persistence, that Lady Cecilia Vale might be considered as a possible Duchess of Northmere. She praised beauty, accomplishments, connections, and the usefulness of an alliance with this family. She did not mention the debts pressing upon Valecombe. She did not mention that much of the estate's order has been maintained by Lady Marianne's unpaid labour. She did not mention that the woman she dismissed as plain was the one keeping the house from showing every crack." Lady Prudence's face hardened. "Your Grace, this is a private family matter. It ceased to be private when you invited neighbours to hear a lie." Mr. Harbury, the solicitor, opened his leather case with slow care and withdrew several papers. He did not speak yet. He did not need to. The mere existence of records made Lady Prudence look suddenly older. Sebastian continued. "I came to Valecombe under a simplified introduction because I wished to learn how this household behaved when it believed power was not watching. I learned enough. I saw Lady Marianne mocked for a dress chosen because she did not wish to compete with Lady Cecilia. I saw wine spilled upon that dress at dinner and then called an accident. I lent my handkerchief openly, before witnesses. That handkerchief was later taken from Lady Marianne's room at Lady Cecilia's direction." Cecilia stepped back. Betsy is confused. Servants hear things and imagine importance. Betsy trembled, but Mrs. Hale's hand stayed at her back. Sebastian looked at the maid. "Betsy, did Lady Cecilia tell you to take the handkerchief from Lady Marianne's drawer?" Betsy's voice was barely more than breath. "Yes, Your Grace." Cecilia turned sharply. "You don't understand what I said." Sebastian did not look away from Betsy. "Were you told it would be used to accuse Lady Marianne?" "No, Your Grace." "I thought it was to be returned." "I didn't know." "No one here will punish you for that truth." The girl's eyes filled, and she lowered her head. Sebastian turned to Mrs. Hale. "Mrs. Hale, did Lady Marianne attempt to display the handkerchief or boast of my title?" "No, Your Grace. She wished the matter kept quiet, for the house's sake." Mr. Greaves cleared his throat near the door. "Lady Marianne has kept the household accounts from confusion for some time, Your Grace. The delays in payment were not of her making." Lady Prudence snapped, "That is enough." "No," Marianne said. Every eye returned to her. The single word surprised them because it did not tremble. "It has not been enough for many years." Lady Prudence stared at her as if a chair had spoken. Cecilia's eyes shone with fury now. "You must be very pleased. At last, everyone is looking at you." Marianne looked at her cousin, and for the first time felt no envy, no defensiveness, no need to soften the truth for a girl trained to mistake admiration for safety. "No," she said. "I am sorry it took this much harm for the room to turn." Cecilia flinched as if the gentleness were worse than accusation. Sebastian faced her fully. "Lady Cecilia, plainness was never her shame. It was your excuse not to see her." The words landed with a force no raised voice could have improved. Mrs. Fane looked down. Sir Edmund shifted his weight. Mr. Ellery whispered something that might have been a prayer. Cecilia's mouth opened, but no elegant reply came. Her beauty had no answer for being named accurately. Lady Prudence drew herself up. Your Grace, if Cecilia has been foolish, it is because she is young and fearful. Surely you will not ruin a young lady over a misunderstanding. No one is being ruined by misunderstanding, Sebastian said. Consequences are not ruin. They are the cost of conduct. He looked to Mr. Harbury. The solicitor stepped forward. I have reviewed the papers Lady Marianne's mother left in trust. There is a modest settlement that should have been preserved for Lady Marianne's independent use. Its management has been irregular. Lady Prudence's face went white. That is a malicious interpretation. It is a legal one, Mr. Harbury said. The funds will be placed under proper trustees. Lady Prudence will no longer control them. The room inhaled. Not loudly. Enough. Marianne felt the meaning slowly enter her. Not wealth. Not freedom entire. But a door. A real one. A thing that could not be taken by a glance or turned against her at luncheon. Lady Prudence sat down as if her knees had lost interest in pride. Cecilia stared at her aunt, and in that look Marianne saw the first fracture between them. They had both believed the same bargain would save them. Now it had cost them differently. Sebastian turned to the assembled guests. Let it be understood. I withdraw all consideration of alliance with Lady Cecilia Vale. I will not receive further proposals from Lady Prudence. I will also consider any repetition of the accusation against Lady Marianne as a deliberate falsehood made after correction. Mrs. Fane swallowed. Of course, Your Grace. Sir Edmund bowed stiffly. Mr. Ellery murmured agreement with visible relief. Then Sebastian did what Marianne had not expected. He turned away from the room and faced her. Not as a duke addressing a dependent lady. Not as a rescuer claiming victory. As a man standing before the person he had injured by delay. Lady Marianne, he said, I owe you an apology before every person who heard me hesitate. The room disappeared at its edges. Marianne felt the stain, the grey muslin, Betsy's parcel, the cold public parlour, the title spoken like a door and then like a bridge. You do, she said. A faint shock moved through the room. Sebastian bowed his head. At luncheon, I allowed a fact to make me slow in defending the truth. You had learned my title, and I let that knowledge delay what I already knew of your character. I am sorry. Not because the room now knows you were innocent, but because you should not have needed this room to know it before I acted. Marianne's throat tightened, but she did not look away. An apology doesn't return the moment. No, he said. It only tells the truth about it. That answer reached her because it did not ask to be forgiven. It stood where it belonged, without demand. Sebastian drew a careful breath. I will not ask you for anything under the shadow of scandal. I will not turn correction into a claim. But if, after today, you permit it, I would like the honor of courting you properly, openly, and with every safeguard your dignity deserves. Cecilia made a broken little sound. Lady Prudence looked as if the world had become impossible. Marianne heard them and did not answer them. She looked only at Sebastian. The man who had watched too long. The Duke who had finally spoken. The guest who had seen her in grey and understood too late, but not too late to stand before the room and name his own failure. Then court me as I am, Your Grace, she said. Not as they failed to make me. Sebastian bowed, and this time the room understood that the honor was not his alone to bestow. It was hers to permit. By the time Marianne first saw Hallowmere Hall, the trees had turned the deep green of early summer, and Valecombe House had become a place people spoke of in lowered voices rather than a place that ruled the direction of her breath. The courtship had not begun with flowers sent too soon or declarations made too loudly. Sebastian had known better. It began with letters written in a hand too controlled to flatter and too honest to charm falsely. The first contained no poetry. It contained an apology repeated without ornament, a list of the safeguards he had arranged for the servants who had spoken the truth, and the name of the trustee who had taken charge of Marianne's settlement under Mr. Harbury's supervision. The second asked whether Mrs. Alder in Bath had received her safely when Marianne chose to stay there for a fortnight after the reckoning at Valecombe. The third asked whether she preferred estate accounts arranged by tenant, repair, or season, and Marianne had laughed so unexpectedly that Mrs. Alder looked up from her sewing and said, "That is either a very dull letter or a very dangerous one." After that came proper calls, always announced, always chaperoned, always patient. Sebastian did not press for forgiveness as if it were a debt due him because he had corrected the public record. He arrived when permitted, left when expected, and spoke to Marianne as though her opinions were not surprises but necessities. He sent no jewels. He sent books with plain paper covers and notes in the margins where he disagreed with the author. He sent a copy of a household ledger from one of the Northmere estates, asking if she found the steward's method sensible. She sent it back with 7 corrections and 1 page marked, "This man is either careless or too accustomed to not being questioned." Sebastian's reply came 2 days later. "He's now very much questioned." News of Lady Prudence and Cecilia reached Marianne more quietly. Lady Prudence had withdrawn from neighbourhood visits after Mr. Harbury placed the settlement under proper trustees, and several creditors, suddenly encouraged by ducal disapproval, began asking direct questions. She did not lose Valecombe, but she lost the pleasure of pretending she alone held it upright. Mr. Griggs was granted authority to manage the worst debts honestly. Mrs. Hale remained in her position, and Betsy was not dismissed. Cecilia was sent to Bath to live with a widowed aunt who possessed no patience for performance and even less for unpaid dressmakers. Her prospects did not vanish, for beauty rarely vanished from society's memory, but they changed. Mothers who once praised her charm began saying she was young and needed time. Gentlemen who had admired her at a distance now bowed with caution. It was not ruin. It was consequence. Marianne found she did not rejoice in it. She had wanted justice, not another woman's destruction. That difference mattered to her. It mattered to Sebastian too. When he formally asked permission to court her from the trustees and from Mrs. Alder, who considered herself morally superior to most trustees, Marianne realized he had not taken a single step as if her answer were owed. That was the reason she eventually gave it. The betrothal was announced not in a ballroom, not beneath chandeliers before a room hungry for applause, but in Mrs. Alder's drawing-room after tea, with rain tapping at the windows and Sebastian standing as if the whole of Northmere depended upon her next word. "I know what the world will think I offer you," he said. "A title, a house, protection, position. But I know what I am asking from you is greater. Trust, after I damaged it. A future, after you had to choose yourself alone. I won't pretend I deserve that by rank." Marianne had looked at his face, at the restraint that had once concealed judgment and now held humility in place. "No," she said. "You won't." He lowered his eyes. "Then what may I offer?" "A life in which I am not made decorative when useful, or useful when inconvenient." He looked up. "That, I can promise. And if I correct your steward, I shall pity him privately and thank you publicly." So she gave him her hand, and Mrs. Alder blew her nose with startling force while pretending to search for a dropped needle. Now, weeks later, the carriage passed between the stone pillars of Hallamere Hall, and Marianne saw the house that would one day be hers to know, not as an ornament placed within it, but as a mind invited to help govern it. Hallamere did not possess Valecombe's anxious performance. It was older, broader, and quieter, built of pale stone that caught the afternoon light without begging for admiration. The park rolled away in green folds. Deer moved at the far edge of the trees. Smoke rose from chimneys in a straight, peaceful line. Servants waited at the entrance, not in stiff terror but in ordered curiosity. Sebastian stepped down first and turned to assist Mrs. Alder because he had already learned that Marianne's companion appreciated being treated like a duchess and distrusted men who noticed only younger women. Then he offered his hand to Marianne. This time, she accepted it. His fingers closed around hers with no claim beyond steadiness. "Welcome to Hallamere," he said. Marianne looked up at the house. "It appears very certain of itself. It has had centuries to practice. Then I shall try not to unsettle it too quickly." "Please do." "The West accounts have been complacent since February." She smiled, and the servants, who were pretending not to watch, learned something useful at once. Their future duchess was not fragile. After the formal greetings, after Mrs. Alder was shown to a chamber with an excellent view and immediately declared the bed hangings too grand to be trusted, Sebastian asked Marianne to walk with him to a small private drawing room overlooking the south lawn. The door was left open. Mrs. Alder remained within calling distance in the adjoining chamber, loudly interrogating a maid about lavender water. Propriety, Marianne thought with affection, had become less a cage than a language they both spoke carefully. Inside the drawing room, the afternoon light rested on polished wood, faded blue chairs, and a table set with nothing more ostentatious than a single porcelain bowl of white roses. On one chair lay the dove-grey muslin dress. Cleaned. Pressed. Folded with reverence. The stain had not vanished entirely. It remained as a faint shadow, visible only where the light touched the weave. Marianne stopped. For several heartbeats she could not speak. The dress had travelled farther than she had expected any wounded thing to travel. Adam sent it, Sebastian said. With a note that said it had survived worse treatment than most silk gowns and deserved a proper retirement. Marianne reached out and touched the sleeve. I thought Lady Prudence might have burned it. Mrs. Hale prevented that. Of course she did. I would not have brought it here if it pained you. His voice was careful. I can have it put away. Marianne shook her head. No. I am only surprised to see it honored. It should be. He stood beside her, not too close. That was the day you tried hardest not to be seen, and the day I first saw anyone clearly in that house. You saw late. Yes. But not falsely. His breath changed. I hope not. Marianne looked at the dress, at the faint mark the wine had left, at the plain cuffs worn thin by years of being useful without being cherished. I used to think grey was the colour of disappearing. And now? She turned to the window, where Halamer's lawns opened under the English sky, wide and unworried by the judgments of drawing rooms. On a nearby table lay another gown, still in tissue, silver blue, and beautifully simple, neither a costume nor an apology. Past and future, side by side. Now I think it is the colour of being seen without decoration, she said. Sebastian's face softened in the reflection of the glass. Then we shall keep it here. Not as a relic. No, he paused. As a witness. Marianne smiled faintly. You do enjoy witnesses, Your Grace. Only honest ones. He took a small step nearer. Marianne, there is something else. I have spoken with the rector and Mrs. Alder. If you still wish it, part of your settlement may support a modest parish patronage here. Household accounts, plain sewing, and practical reading for girls in service or dependent families. Not charity designed to make the patron look benevolent. Something useful. She looked at him. You remembered. I intend to make a habit of remembering what matters to you. There were proposals grander than that. There were phrases more elegant. None would have reached her more deeply. Marianne touched the grey dress once more, then let her hand fall. At Valecombe, I was always asked to make other people's lives easier. At Halamere, Sebastian said, I would ask you to make our life true. The word our settled between them, no longer dangerous, no longer a trap. Mrs. Alder coughed loudly from the next room, a reminder that sentiment had limits and doors remained open. Marianne laughed softly, and Sebastian smiled as if that sound had altered the house more than any title could. Outside, the evening light warmed the lawns. Inside, the grey dress rested beside the silver-blue gown, not hidden, not worshipped, not allowed to define her, but kept as proof that the woman who had once stood at the edge of a room had not vanished. She had crossed the room. She had spoken. She had been believed. And in the quiet heart of Halamere Hall, she was no longer the lady in grey whom no one was meant to remember. She was Marianne, future Duchess of Northmere, and she had brought every plain, wounded, honest part of herself home.